Hey, yo, Highside, Lowsiders, Zach here, joined by Spurge. As always, this is Season 10, Episode 1. We are talking about the best of 2025 with our good friend Lance Oliver. We'll be talking about the Yamaha R9. We'll be talking about a $110,000 Harley-Davidson small adventure bikes. You name it, we're probably talking about it. Plus, am I the a-hole? And how many fingers do you use on the clutch? Anyway, first, a word from our sponsor.
So you've just spent hours washing and detailing your motorcycle, and you don't want to do that every time you go out. You want to be able to ride, so you need to check out Motool's E10 Shine and Go spray. In between washes, spray a little bit of this onto your motorcycle, keep it looking nice and neat, and it leaves a protective film, which helps to repel dirt and grime so that it's not as hard to wash next time. Check out Motool's E10 Shine and Go spray, as well as their entire line of cleaning products over on RevZilla.com/Motool. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the Airbag Save page. RevZilla is dedicated to making sure that you are informed about all the newest safety technology coming down the pike, and the newest, most protective safety technology that we've seen in recent years is the evolution of airbag technology. So to learn about the entire line of airbag products and which one might be right for you and your ride, check out RevZilla.com/airbags. Now, on with the show.
Okie dokie, Spurjo. Welcome back. Can you believe, I think we did this last season too, but I'm going to ask you again. Can you believe that we are on season 10 of Highside, Lowside? Did you ever think you'd see the day?
Season 10, man. I mean, it's been a long time coming. I think we've made some evolutions along the way. We'll discuss here in a minute some of the evolutions that we're going to make moving forward for season 10.
Yep.
I think, it was funny. Like, I'm going into this with some kind of a bronchial infection, and I feel like we ended out season 9 with me, recovering from COVID, and now we're heading fresh into season 10. And this has been, life with a child in daycare. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for how to survive the cold winters. I guess you don't. You're in Southern California. You don't have to worry about this.
That's right. I don't have my child does not go to daycare, and I don't have a real winter. So I'm like, you're fighting with.
You can't be empathetic to me at all. Yeah.
I can't really. I was going to ask you to update the audience. So how old is Mini Spurge now?
At the time of recording, he is about to celebrate his 8-month birthday.
8-month anniversary. Wow. Yeah. Right on. All right. And
how about your young little boy?
My little guy is 2.5.
Time flies.
And so yeah, we are in the throes of learning whole new levels of patience, and our immune systems are going through the ringer.
I remember when we were in India together, and you were explaining to me like how you were, just getting into like eating solid foods and away from like the milk.
My child was, that means.
Yeah, and those were the kind of conversations that we had for hours on end while driving through the Indian countryside. And we're deep into that right now. Like, he liked some of the first trials of solids, and now he's just rejecting everything. And nice. My wife and I are just battling to try and get, something into his mouth.
Yep. As far as I understand it, it's little flurries of joy, punctuated by large swaths of rejection and disappointment.
We got a note from his teacher at daycare the other day. It was like, he ate none of his food. And my wife and I were just laughing because it was just like the way that she wrote it and she typed it out. We're like, yeah, that sounds like my boy. So,
well, speaking of things growing and getting bigger, like our little boys are, thank you everyone for coming along for that non-motorcycle journey. We have made a couple of slight tweaks to the Highside, Lowside podcast, some of which we will cover later in this show and later in this season. But right out of the gate, Spurge, we're doing things a little different up front.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, Zach and I found ourselves kind of struggling at times for, not the news topics.
Quote unquote, not the news.
Exactly. And we tried to find stories that were a little bit more evergreen, and we might still hit some of those, but we also might take some of them and expand them into longer episodes. So what we decided to do as a warm up, outside of, bantering about our kids, is to incorporate a new little segment, which kind of features you, the audience. So we're going to do Am I the Asshole? Roast My Ride, funny Craigslist finds, things like this. And we would ask you, the audience, if you have a thought topic around, am I the asshole? Or, hey, here's a picture of my motorcycle. Go ahead and roast it.
Or a friend's motorcycle that you want us to make fun of.
If you want us to pick on one of your riding buddies, we can do that too. So you'll get a sense for how this goes as we work through the season. The other note is that we hear you, right? There's a lot of people out there talking about like, I'm leaving comments on Spotify. Why don't I get a t-shirt? And you're only giving t-shirts to Apple Podcast, reviews and blah, 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 blah. So couple notes up front. We're going to be giving away a lot more t-shirts. Pay attention throughout the episode. If we tell you that you get a t-shirt, make sure you shoot us an email with your preferred size and address information. The other thing is that we're going to have new t-shirts celebrating season 10.
Right.
So you'll get to pick which t-shirt you want us to mail you. And if you're somebody that just likes spending money on t-shirts, you can go and buy one of the new Highside, Lowside t-shirts as well. I think we should have some new designs up at the time of record or at the time of release, as well as some new ones releasing throughout the season.
Very important to remember that you can always win new motorcycle gear and a Highside, Lowside t-shirt at RevZilla if you just pay for it. You can win anytime you like, really.
That's true.
24/7.
Every time I open up my wallet, I'm winning. That's what I tell my wife. So let's get started. You say?
Yeah. On that topic, the first kickoff topic we have is "Am I the a-hole?" which came in from listener Raymond Yu via email.
I like that you edited yourself there. I didn't do that earlier.
I'm not sure if they have to bleep a-hole, but I figured, am I the a-hole? Everybody knows what we're talking about.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay. Spurge, talk us through what's Raymond's conundrum here.
So Raymond writes in and says, am I the a-hole for filtering to the front of the road in the bicycle lane?
Right.
Sometimes I'll also ride on the shoulder in a 2-lane mountain highway to skip traffic to where I live, which is right off of the said highway. So it sounds like Raymond is using the bicycle lane as well as the pedestrian lane to ride his motorcycle. And he wants to know how we feel about this.
Right. Is he the a-hole for using the bicycle lane in sort of urban, suburban areas, and then maybe slightly more rural areas, he just uses the shoulder to skip traffic? Okay. So there's some interpretation here. Spurge, your thoughts right out of the gate?
First and foremost, I'd like to assume that Raymond is not living in a state where lane splitting is legal, and that's why this question has come up.
Oh, I see. So you don't think Raymond lives in California or one of the other states? I gotcha. Okay, so I think I know where you're going here. Do you think Raymond is an a-hole?
I do. Like here's the problem that I have with this, and I have the same problem, and I feel like we maybe touched on this in the discussion around lane filtering last season, but anytime, motorcycling is in the minority, and anytime you're doing something that casts a negative light on motorcycles,
right,
it's not gonna do anybody any good. So while I'm sure Raymond's not hurting anybody, and there's not some 3-year-old on a tricycle in the bicycle lane that he's running over,
right, punting out of his way.
But if the perception as he's blowing through in the bicycle lane by all the cars waiting at a stop sign are that this guy is breaking the law, it's not going to do anything to favor motorcycles. That's my quick takeaway here. What about yourself?
Well, I think I'm a little more torn. But you're right.
Yeah, but you're the kind of guy that goes around parking garage turnstiles and illegally parks, and you're a rebel.
I'm a rebel.
Zach Quartz, rebel without a cause.
I don't think yes, I think kind of like, to put it simply, Raymond, you're breaking the rules, and it's not cool. And Spurge's take is correct, because here's the thing. I see why you're doing it, Raymond, because it's a victimless crime. There's no one is being set back or sort of harmed by you doing this. And so you're sort of like, I'm just going to do the thing. I'm just going to go down the side edge of traffic, and no one has to be the wiser, and it's not a big deal. But the optics are bad. The optics are bad for motorcycling, and Spurge is right on that front. I will tell us a quick anecdote. I one time used, so in California here, where I live, you're allowed to lane filter, to split lanes. And, it was a stop traffic at a traffic light. And I was riding between cars gently to get to the front of the line as to to the right side of the lane was a right-hand turn lane, right? So it was like 2 lanes in one direction, and then there was a right-hand turn lane, and the right-hand turn lane was empty. And I kind of I basically just like used the right-hand turn lane for the last like 100 yards of the intersection, and then I pulled up to the front of the going straight lane. So in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm allowed to go to the front. What difference does it make if I use that lane? Well, I got pulled over. Motor officer pulled me over, said, you can't use the right-hand turn lane just to cut to the front of the line. And I kind of thought, well, but I'm allowed to cut to the front of the line anyway. So what difference does it make if I use the right-hand turn lane? I'm not holding anyone up who's turning right.
Yeah.
But I got in trouble for it. And perhaps in that motor officer's mind, while also following the rule of law, thought that I would making everybody look bad for motorcyclists. It's like not a good look to just cut to the front of the line like that.
I can almost I've done that before, right? So I'm a little bit empathetic.
Sure, okay,
towards,
so
I'm a little bit empathetic towards you're in a motor vehicle lane using it to get to the front of the line. You said that Raymond's crime is victimless. I disagree. I think every motorcyclist that's following the rules is being victimized by Raymond in the perception of the public. But we have Lance Oliver as our guest for the podcast today. Lance, you've been listening in this whole time. And I know that you have nothing but respect for the opinions of Zach and I, but we seem to be at a bit of a loggerheads here. Do you have any thoughts on this, Lance? And we're going to come off mute. You're going to join the conversation now. Is Raymond an a-hole for breaking the law a little bit here?
That's maybe a little harsh to say a-hole, but I believe that I do believe that riding your motorcycle down the bike lane is not a good thing. And even if there's nobody there, I certainly hope he's not doing it with bicycles there too. But I guess I'd be a little more sympathetic on the other scenario that he described, if I'm understanding it correctly, where, okay, you're on, you're going to make a right turn, traffic's kind of backed up, you go down the shoulder because you're getting to that turn you're going to make. You're not like squeezing in front of people. Right. You're just getting to the turn. I guess I don't think I would feel too bad about that, but I don't ride in bike lanes myself.
So, Lance, for the audience that doesn't know you, you're a nice guy. I don't think I've ever pictured you call anyone an a-hole, even the people that deserve it. Is that fair to say?
You must have called Spurgeon an a-hole at some point.
No, well, I've called Spurgeon a lot of things. I mean, let's face it,
usually behind my back, though, so I don't have to hear it.
There are many colorful adjectives that can apply to Spurgeon, but that's I don't think I've ever called him an a-hole, though. No.
Well, to round out the am I the a-hole conversation here, I appreciate your take, Lance. I think the bottom line is, I think Spurgeon's take is good, and I don't think I can fully say no, you're in the clear here, Raymond. If gun to my head, I'm siding with Spurgeon. I'm saying you're being a little bit of an a-hole riding down the bike lane. You probably shouldn't do that. As far as riding down the shoulder of the mountain road or the mountain highway, as Lance was talking about, I would just be that's something that you could, if you're doing it for the last 50 yards before your turn and you're going to make it fine. If you're doing it for a mile or two, maybe you're pushing it a little bit there. Also, keep in mind, anytime you ride down a shoulder, that's an emergency pull-off area where cars are supposed to be able to just, if someone's kid's about to barf in the back seat and they're like, and they just yank the wheel and pull over into the shoulder. That's what that lane is there for. And you could get planked.
I feel like the theme that I'm getting already in the first 10 minutes of this episode of season 10 is that we should also have a subsequent children's podcast where we talk about all the things that new parents should be considering.
All the crazy things kids
Barfing
can do
on the side of the road. Next on Highside, Lowside.
Anyway, I think Raymond, it sounds like you sent an email with a little bit of a guilty conscience, and we are expressing some of the feelings of said conscience and saying, maybe try to do what feels like the right thing a little bit more often.
So speaking of people that like to do the right thing, Lance Oliver, welcome to the show. For those of you that have never listened to Highside, Lowside before, Lance Oliver is the managing editor of CommonTread, our online magazine over at RevZilla.com. Lance is the one responsible for your daily dose of motorcycle news, entertainment, and reviews that live every day over on CommonTread. And Lance, we've brought you onto the podcast today because we are going to discuss the best motorcycles of 2025. We're probably a little bit late to the party on this one, but considering we're still getting regular invites for press launches and a lot of these bikes haven't hit the market yet, we're feeling pretty good that by the time you're listening to this at the end of March 2025. Some of these, if not all of these bikes, will be on dealership floors for you to consider in the new year.
Indeed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that we're just now getting to ride some of the most interesting motorcycles that we're seeing this year, and some of them we still haven't gotten to ride yet. So there's still more to come.
Do you? I'm going off script here a little bit, Spurge. But do you have a standout, Lance? Before we dive into our,
you stole my question. I love that.
what's the one bike that in all of late 2024 and early 2025 that's either coming out soon or is out now or we've seen photos of or whatever that you feel like you are the most excited about?
Well, I guess I'm going to cheat a little bit and give you two answers. On a personal level, I really find the Triumph Tiger Sport 800 interesting. Yeah. I think that's just a particular segment of the market that I really like myself. So I haven't actually had a chance to see it in the flesh yet myself, but I hope I get to pretty soon.
Right.
And then I think the other thing that's going to be really interesting, and I know I'm not alone on this, is seeing how the Yamaha YZF R9 does, not only as a street bike, but also how it does in the super sport racing category. So that's going to be interesting. And the Tiger, we did have a review. Dustin Whelan, right, our writer, was able to go over to Spain and get a first ride on that one. So that's on CommonTread.
He's the only one that's laid hands on that bike up to this point.
And Ari Henning is about to go ride the R9. So that story should be coming out right around the time this podcast comes out. Yeah,
it should be live by the time people are hearing this, and that'll be interesting. There's plenty of expectation around that R9. That's for sure. Cool. Those are good answers. I like them.
Well, I think what I like about those answers is it takes us as a perfect segue into how we've broken this up. So if you're listening to the podcast, we want to start by talking about sport touring. We'll then move into cruisers and the touring aspect category. We'll then go into ADV dual sport, standard, and electric. So that's kind of some of the theme segments that we broke this up into. But Lance, both of your picks actually fall into the sport touring category. Let's kick things off with a discussion just around the Yamaha R9, because I do think that's an interesting one that leans a little bit more on the sports side. Yeah. Can we just give a quick synopsis for the audience, Lance? For the R9, what are they getting here, and why is this a little bit different than what we've seen in Yamaha's sport lineup in the past?
Well, so we had the traditional inline fours from Yamaha. You had the R6 600cc class, and you had the R1 1000cc class, and that's the way it's been forever and ever. And then, of course, in recent years, somewhat less hard-edged twins have been filtering into the sport class, because frankly what happened is the sport bikes got so hyper focused on getting around a racetrack that they were not much fun to ride on the street anymore.
And they were expensive.
And they were, the insurance was out through the roof for a lot of young people who wanted to buy them. And so anyway, the R9 is interesting because it takes the 3-cylinder engine that Yamaha has and puts it in a sport package. And
the famous 3-cylinder engine from the MT-09, previously FZ-09, also in the Tracer, XSR 900, so on and so forth.
So it's which is a popular power plant to start with, and now we're going to get it into a sport package, and it's basically in super sport racing, we have now the next generation rules. So where you used to have just 600cc inline fours, now we've got all kinds of different bikes that are balanced by a formula competing. So we have a Panigale V2 from Ducati, so you've got a V-twin, and you've got, we still actually had an R6 racing, for example, in Moto America last year, but you have the GSXR 750 from Suzuki, the 4-cylinder, and all these bikes are kind of mixing it up, and the R9 is going to go into that mix, which will give us a whole new entry into that.
So on the topic of, you said for a long time, Yamaha had the R6 and the R1, the R1 being the 1000cc sport bike, leader bike, and the R6 being the 600cc option. And there wasn't anything really between those two bikes performance wise.
It is.
And that makes me realize that, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, how long has it been since, because way back when American Superbike racing was, not even way back when, but like 25 years ago or something like that, American Superbike racing was 750cc inline fours. So that like a GSXR 750 was the superbike, and the Kawasaki ZX7 was the superbike. But it's that long ago, Kawasaki was using a YZF 750 or something like that. Is that?
They did make a 750. Yeah, they did make a 750 specifically to homologate for racing.
And I suppose they made an R7 also. They raced an R7, which was like
an R7.
Right. The previous generation R7 was a real spicy, sort of like homologated racer that was a different ball of wax. But that is an interesting point that you make, like Lance, for Yamaha specifically. It's been a really long time since there's been a sport bike, a true sport bike in that displacement category.
Yeah, because 750s, as you said, now, 20 some years ago when superbike racing was 750 4 cylinders or 1000cc twins.
Yep.
That was superbike. Now, next generation super sport is almost that, because you got the GSX-R 750, which used to race a superbike, and you have the Panigale V2, which last year was a 955, which isn't that far off from 1000.
Yeah.
So, that whole inflation creep of motorcycles getting bigger, faster, et cetera, had affected super sport.
In case no one's heard of the R9, Lance, what would you say on a level of zero anticipation to maximum anticipation at level 10? On a scale of 1 to 10, where is the R9 as far as anticipation? How long has everyone been waiting for this bike?
I mean, it's pretty high. I hesitate to give it a 10.
Number.
But it's going to be one of those upper numbers for sure. There's Definitely. Just a lot of interest in it, I think, and expectations are pretty high.
We've also just been waiting so long, right? I mean, everyone's been talking about an R9 for like 3 years.
Right, it's been supposedly coming forever. And I think one more thing that has even boosted the expectation at this last minute is that recently we had the first round of World Superbike in Phillip Island, Australia, and the very first race of the year in the super sport category was won by an R9.
So here's an
first out of the gate
thought on this, because you briefly hit on and then kind of glanced over the middleweight category, kind of going to twins, right? And we've seen this with Yamaha, we've seen this with Suzuki. Honda still, what is Honda doing in the middleweight category?
They have the four still, actually, yeah.
So I think when you're looking at this, Cowie's got twins in their middleweight category at this point. But the big critique with the R7 was, while they put a more usable, friendly motor in the bike for regular people riding on the street, it was a pretty aggressive riding triangle. It's a pretty aggressive chassis. So my question specifically around the R9, because it is a really usable street engine. It's a lot of fun. It's been, revered by a lot of different people that have gotten to ride one in the MT09 chassis. The question becomes are they going to make this bike too aggressive for street riding and for street comfort? Because you guys are talking about racing and homologating and all this, and I get that. And I understand that there's people that want that, but for me, the excitement that I have, we talked about some of the CommonTread stuff, and one of the articles or one of the bikes that I was most excited about in 2024 was the 2025 model year GSX-8R, because it was a little bit more usable, and comfortable as a sport bike, for the average person like myself. And then you're looking at something like the Yamaha R9, and I think it's a more usable, rider-friendly engine. But are they going to make this where it's really just aimed at people wanting to go around a racetrack?
Well, we'll find out the real full answer when Ari gets to go ride it here very shortly. But the indications that we have so far, just from sort of looking at what we've seen, is that it won't be quite as racy as the position on the R7. So might be a little bit more street friendly. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's I think one of the reasons that sport bike people, if you will, if you don't mind me lumping you together, are excited about the R9 is that the R7. You said it's an aggressive rider triangle and an aggressive chassis, Spurge, and it is a surprisingly aggressive riding position on the R7, but the chassis itself is not aggressive from the standpoint of being super prepared to go around a track. Like
when you're talking about the suspension and
exactly. The suspension's a little soft, the brakes are a little weak. They're it's not a super high horsepower bike, and it's built to a price point. And so, I'm not mad about it. I like the R7, but it was very surprising to me that it was so racy to sit on, considering it's a pretty mild engine, and it's ultimately has sort of mild capabilities. I tend to think that Suzuki with the GSX-8R and Kawasaki with the Ninja 650 have sort of maybe gone a slightly smarter direction by making bikes that look racy but are like a little bit easier to sit on. So all that is to say, the R9 I think is like a bike that the people, like true, again, you sport bike people will be excited about, because they're sort of like, cool, now maybe the suspension will be a little bit more capable of sport riding and the brakes will be better. And if it is an aggressive riding position, then it'll be the bike that you want it to be. And if you want to have that 3-cylinder power plant in a street bike, then buy an MT-09, right?
So let's keep the theme going here, but shift gears just in a slightly different direction. So Zach, you just got back from riding the Panigale V2. Right?
I did.
And I read your article
YZF
on
R9
that.
competitor, you might say.
Exactly. And, a similar theme there. And you could even, we could start by talking about Ducati's, entire V2 line, is it seems like they're taking a similar angle too, of maybe making something a bit more usable for the average person,
right,
versus some of these, V4 behemoths that they've been, releasing recently.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I'm pulling back from the, even from the Panigale V2, which as Lance pointed out, as of last year was a 955cc engine, and the new bike is an 890cc engine, and it makes 35 less horsepower. And the handlebars are much higher. They're much farther back, closer to the rider. The foot pegs are farther forward. It's a fairly seismic shift, especially for a company like Ducati, which just typically does more is more. More is always better and more. And to adopt a sort of less is more attitude is surprising from Ducati. And I only rode that bike on a racetrack. I didn't ride it on the street. So I don't think I can really say how much more comfortable it is, but it definitely feels smaller, feels a little more compact, and the engine does not feel as kind of like racy. The engine feels much more mild, and it's 120 horsepower engine. So it's still plenty of power to blow your hair back, but it's calmer, and it's not quite as spicy.
For people that didn't read your article, did Ducati talk about that at all at the launch of the bike? Did they talk about, who they were positioning it for, or why they were kind of, bringing it back down to earth a little bit for the average rider?
Well, there's two viewpoints on that. I think, yeah, they did talk about it. I mean, they met all that stuff head on. They said, Ducati said, we're doing this very much on purpose. In fact, they pointed out world super sport specs, and the fact that I think it was, I believe, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, the ECU, basically the throttle opening of the 2024 Panigale V2 in World Supersport spec was 70%. So Ducati could only use 70% of maximum throttle because the bike's just too powerful. Like it's a 155 horsepower spec engine. It's just like too big for the class. So they let the bike race in the class, but they neutered it so that it didn't have all the horsepower. So Ducati kind of has that in mind, right? They know that racing classes are ultimately part of why you build a sport bike. And so they wanted the bike to be a little bit more mild and a little bit more prepared to race against 600, 750 inline fours and that kind of thing. And so it just sort of made sense. And in doing so, they made the bike a lot lighter and more agile. And the whole point was to make a sort of a similarly capable but different track weapon. And I think that the cynic's point of view on that is sort of if you rejigger the whole formula, if you reset the mixtures in your recipe for the Panigale V2, you can design in ways to save more money in manufacturing and charge a little bit less, but not as much less as you are saving. So from a business standpoint, it would make sense. But in general, I think it's a smart step to take. I don't think that it made sense to have a bike that had 155 horsepower and a bike that has 200 and something horsepower. Like, why not just have, like, 120 is a much more reasonable amount of horsepower, and a lower price and a lower weight is just always a good idea. So
I think as we go through this episode, that's one of the things that I'm trying to keep an eye out, as we get to kind of like our summation at the end of, like, what are the themes that we're seeing? And as we're paying attention to all these categories as we go through, like, are we seeing a trend where, there is more of this, like, let's be realistic about what we're building and not just throwing more horsepower at it?
Well, just to jump in, a couple other anecdotes. One, Ducati said, someone asked why didn't, at the press event that I went to in Spain to ride that Panigale V2, someone said, why doesn't it have wings? It doesn't have aerodynamic winglets, just like every motorcycle and its uncle has these days. And Ducati flat out said that would be dumb. I mean, that's not a direct quote. I think they said wings on 120 horsepower would be fake. That was the direct quote.
I like that.
And it didn't.
Yeah. Bless them for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that plays into your theme a little bit, Spurge. And one more story I'd like to tell from that launch was they showed us alleged, this is internal Ducati testing, but they showed us lap time comparisons between the old Panigale V2, 155 horsepower, $18,000 quote unquote middleweight, compared to the new Panigale V2. And they showed us 2 lap time comparisons, a professional rider and then like a fast amateur, like a good club racer basically, but not a professional.
Was it you? Were you the professional amateur?
No, okay. I was not. The professional rider was faster on the old bike. Ducati said that. They said if you're a professional level rider, you're going to be faster. The fast amateur was a little bit faster on the new bike. So that's the what they're trying to edge toward. The point that they're trying to make is not that the outright capability of a bike that has less horsepower is higher, but rather it makes more sense for more people. And I think that
I love that.
Something I appreciate.
I think that's the direction we need to be thinking about in motorcycling in general, is like what is better for the average rider versus always trying to aim towards, the pinnacle of performance that most people just can't touch.
Yeah.
Speaking of pinnacle of performance, Lance, for you, the other bike that you talked about here was the Tiger Sport 800. And this is one that's definitely on my list of bikes that I too would love to ride. Walk the audience through. And this is, for those of you paying attention, or that maybe for those of you that aren't familiar, this shifts us a little bit more into the sport touring side of sport. Mm-hmm. But Lance, can you give us a brief rundown of what the Tiger Sport 800 is and, why this is something that excites you?
Yeah, it is definitely, I think, an interesting sport touring option. Its specs is like 113 horsepower, about 472 pounds. So, good balance of performance and weight there. It's very much a sport touring riding position. I just got back from Daytona right before we were recording this. And I thought, great, I'm going to be down there. I was at the Speedway. Everybody's got their demo rides set up. There's, all the manufacturers there with the Beachhead. And I'm going to walk around and see some of these new bikes. And one of the ones I definitely wanted to see in the flesh was this Tiger Sport 800. And I walk over to the huge Triumph tent. And they have like 4 or 5 motorcycles sitting there. And I'm like, everybody must be out on a demo ride. So I kind of sidle over to one of the people wearing a Triumph shirt, and they say, "Oh yeah, well actually we're doing our demo rides at the dealer down the street, and that's where all the bikes are." So I didn't even get to see.
Oh, come on!
I didn't get to see the bike, much less ride the thing. Unlike Dustin, who got to go off and ride it, so I was a little jealous on that.
Well, to put it in, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Lance, but I think maybe to help draw a picture for people who are not watching the video and are not looking at a picture of it currently. It's sort of it's like a Kawasaki Versys or a Yamaha Tracer kind of like upright riding position with a bit of a windshield. And it's sort of this like quasi adventure looking, but fully street bike 17-inch wheel thing.
Right.
And it has like to compare it to a Kawasaki Versys 650, for example, it has, quite a bit more power and a little bit less weight. So it's sort of like it's a more performance oriented, faster, more luxurious version of that bike. Maybe something more in line with the Yamaha Tracer 9 GT, which is has similar specs. I think 115 horsepower and a little under 500 pounds, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason Lance Oliver's excited about this bike, everybody, is that it makes great sense. Yeah. It makes great sense. It's a fun, punchy engine. It's engine from the 765 Triumphs that we've come to know and love, right? More or less.
Triumph swears it's not the same engine. I mean, it does.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they swear it's a new engine, despite the size similarity. But haven't taken one apart, so I can't prove them.
Yeah, fair enough. But anyway, the point is the formula is similar.
I think that was one of the things
popular.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I was curious about with this model, was whether they were going to do like a sleeved down version of the 900 triple that's in like the Tiger Adventure line, or if they were going to do something that's more derivative of the Street triple line, which I think we've all come to really love and appreciate. It sounds like that's more of the derivation that they've kind of went with. I like it. You're talking about a Versys 650. to me, this almost gets back into something like the Triumph Sprint ST 1050 of
yesteryear. That's one of your all-time faves.
It is, but I think when I'm looking at this, it's kind of like an updated version of that. It's what I would call, it's not a half fairing, but there's like a belly pan on it with like a little fairing at the top. It has more of a classic sport bike look to it. I love the color match luggage you can get with it. And to me, this gets into something where they're not shooting for the moon, right? They're not going after, they didn't put their 1200 cc triple engine in this saying, oh, we're going to put a 165 horsepower sport touring bike out there. They definitely went a little bit more to that mid-size, lightweight, touring capability, which I think, personally, it has me very excited. And I love the colorways they went with. If you're looking at Dustin's article, the burnt yellow color is kind of a throwback to some of the heritage colors of the 2000s for me. So I like what they're doing with this.
Okay, so I just looked it up, and it's the same bore as the 765 Street Triple that we've come to know and love, as I said, and the new Tiger Sport 800 have the Tiger Sport 800 has a larger engine, 798 cc's as opposed to 765. It's the same bore. It has a longer stroke. It makes power lower in the revs. Presumably it's a little bit torqueier because it has has a much higher torque spec because it has a longer stroke. So it is a different engine, but having the same bore and the same compression ratio is
that's why everybody was so skeptical, and we just assumed they just took the 765 engine and stroked it, and everybody assumed that, and Triumph keeps swearing that that's not the case. But anyway, I think the other to get
sounds like a shop manual episode for Eric Henning. If only we had the budget to just buy two of these bikes and have them rip the engines down,
take it apart,
and then the three of us would be satisfied that no one else would care.
To address Spurgeon's point, I talking about some of the larger displacement Triumphs in the past, what this is really for a lot of people. Triumph came out with the Tiger Sport 660 just a couple of years ago.
Right. Yep.
And a lot of people really liked that bike. It was, they thought it was a really good sport touring package, but I wish it had just a little more power. I wish it had a little better components such as brakes.
I wish it was a little more expensive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So all of that kind of thing. And so that's what this is. This is that with, moved up to the next level, better brakes, better components.
Electronic cruise control was the big complaint there too, I believe.
Well, they've added that now. So
that's what I'm saying. Like that was part of the reason for the bump up too.
Yeah, well, I think you're right to be excited about that bike. I will say that. And I would like to use that as a way to pivot back to Ducati's V2 lineup, because in addition to the Panigale V2, which we spoke about at some length just now, there's also a new Street Fighter V2, which uses more or less the same engine, and a Multistrada V2, which uses more or less the same engine. And Dustin also went to Spain to test the Multistrada V2. So there's an article for you all to read his take on that bike. But I think that is and I want to talk about the Multi V2 in a little bit more detail in a second here, but indicative of how much Ducati has shifted that Panigale and Street Fighter platform toward a road going sort of bias, that it shares the engine with the Multistrada, which is a sport touring style bike. And I think that's a real sort of show of Ducati's intentions with the sport side of the lineup, that the sport touring bike is sharing the same engine. And I think that Multi V2 will be sort of comparable to the that Tiger Sport 800 we were just talking about. Similar kind of thing, upright, perhaps a little bit more emphasis on touring, the Multi V2 than the Tiger Sport 800, but a similar bike. Is there any reason you're not excited about the Multi V2 instead of the Tiger Sport 800, Lance? Or
I mean, I personally, I would have a slight preference for the Triumph Triple over the V Twin, but I mean, okay, yeah. Not really.
You're a bit of a Triumph guy. You're a Speed Triple owner.
I'm waiting to see.
Lance is also a bargain hunter, and one is more affordable than the other one.
That's another true. Yeah,
that's true. That is true. That Tiger Sport 800, I think, is less than 13 grand. Isn't it?
It's 12,870. 12,870.
Right. Okay. So a little under 13. That's a pretty good deal there, I'd say. I mean, not that I haven't ridden the bike, but
I think the other piece too for me is like, and maybe this is just looking at pictures, but like the Multistrada strikes me more as like, it feels more like that upright adventure bike, naked adventure bike with 17-inch wheels style to it. Whereas like when I look at the Tiger Sport 800, it feels more like what I think of when I think of a sport touring motorcycle. Right. And that's, I know that's a weird differentiation. Like I think anyone can go out on a BMW GS 1200 or a Multistrada and sport tour the hell out of it all day long.
Yeah.
But I think when I think of a traditional sport tourer, I'm looking at Lance Oliver, who has a VFR in the garage. And this is something that I think probably strikes a little bit more of a chord for people that historically want that aesthetic.
Yeah. Not to mention for those of us who want that aesthetic and also are getting older and less limber and less desirous of trying to throw a leg over a high seat every year. So
true enough. Yeah, true enough.
Well, extra inch.
Before we move on from the sport touring category, a couple of the bikes we had marked was Triumph Zone Speed Triple, actually, which is technically new and updated for 2025, though there's not a whole lot that's new there. By the time this podcast goes live, Mr. Dustin, I believe, will have gone to the Iberian Peninsula yet again to ride that bike. There's Freelancer covering that one, I think.
Yeah, we have.
I apologize.
Our contributor Rich Taylor is going to the Speed Triple. Right. Yeah.
And then speaking of contributors, our buddy Al Fagan from 44 Teeth covered a bike that we think is kind of interesting in the sport category, which is the CF Moto 675 SS, which is in some manner of speaking a sort of Triumph Daytona 675 knockoff that CF Moto's come out with, but based on what CF Moto's been doing with its own in-house engines in the past couple years, I would say I'm interested in this bike. I'm interested in reading Al's article, which I think again will be live by the time you're listening to this podcast.
That'll be out momentarily, before this podcast comes out.
Lance, let me ask you a question, because you as somebody that has edited Al's article. I know that CF Moto, we've talked about CF Moto in the past. They've obviously, I think the first time we really started talking about them was kind of the derivative of, their work with KTM, and some of the use of being able to manufacture the 790 engine for KTM and then use that in their own models. Do we have any news that this is some kind of a similar partnership with Triumph, or is this similarity just in name alone?
No, this is not due to a partnership with Triumph. This is just they're taking that formula, and it's not really so. It's got the 675 triple like the former Daytona, but in nature and style, it's really more like the current Triumph 660 in the sense that it's not as much of a hard edged sport bike. It's not so much of a race replica. It's moving more towards something that's more useful on the street. Al wrote in his article, one of his disappointments was that he only got to ride it on the track. And he said, I really want to know how this thing works on the street, because that's honestly more of its natural habitat than the track. And he was riding it at Portimao, and, which is a daunting track for any motorcycle. But he was a little disappointed that he didn't get to ride it on the street.
Yeah. And that's again, Spurge, that's a nod to that sort of theme of sport bikes becoming more reasonable and things getting a little smaller.
I think the other thing we'll talk about, as we work our way through, and I do want to move on to cruisers at this point in time, because we've talked a lot about sport and sport touring. But this isn't the first time that we'll mention a Chinese manufacturer for this episode. And I think it's one of those themes where I think we're going to see more of this from a legitimacy standpoint as some of these brands become a bit more mature. CF Moto, I feel like we've been talking about for a few years at this time, and they're definitely falling into more of a mature category. But with that being said, as of this week, as of the recording of this, the newest Harley Davidson model has hit the floor. And I think we'd be remiss to start off the cruising touring category without talking about the fact that you can buy, is it $112,000? $110,000 for a Harley Davidson CVO Road Glide RR that Ari Henning just got back from riding. What a spicy meatball.
Ultra. Go ahead, Lance.
No, I mean, last year, about this time, I went and rode the CVO Road Glide ST,
Right. Which is a paltry
$42,000 and was the most expensive motorcycle I had ever ridden in my long and not too illustrious career. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's something. And then they blew it out of the water by bringing out one this year that's almost 3 times the price. So much for my measly little $42,000 ST.
However, this is extremely limited, right?
Yes, 131
units,
I believe.
Yeah.
Which is a nod to the 131 cubic inch engine that it has, which for those of you who want that in metric, as we normally talk about with engine size, it's something like 2,150 cc's, 2,170, something like that.
Yeah, I lost track.
Whatever. It's massive. They're 1,000 cc cylinders, basically, 2 of them right next to each other.
And really what this is you're looking at premium suspension, you're looking at big Brembo brakes. They tried to really go after the King of the Baggers race bike and say, we're going to make something that's street legal for the average rider. But
they kind of blended it. They didn't try to make a King of the Baggers race bike for the street.
This is my problem with this bike. Okay. Zach and I were at MotoGP last year Ari was with us. We got to sit on the King of the Baggers race team for Vance and Hines bikes. They were very kind enough to let us sit on the bikes. And I remember thinking, like, this is great. Like, tall seat height. My feet were below me, slightly behind me. Nice wide handlebar. And the first images I saw of Ari riding this bike, it was a low seat. Your feet are in front of you, or they're mid controls, and I'm using air quotes for those of you listening. But like, it feels like they could have done something here, very similar to what Indian did a few years ago. Indian released a King of the Baggers limited edition bike. It was similarly astronomically priced. Theirs was on the track only. But they could have done something here that really just said, we're gonna pull out all the stops. We're gonna give you, slightly rear set foot pegs. We're gonna give you that tall seat. We're gonna give you a big low handlebar. And instead, that's my only gripe with this. I like what Harley did here. I just wish they would have taken it all the way versus the mini ape hangers, the mid forward controls, and the low, butt to the ground seat.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately that's not their thing to build an actual sport bike. And I think that they basically just blended the two, right? They blended the King of the Baggers race bike with a traditional bagger touring bike. And so the seat is a little higher than a bagger, but it's much lower than the race bike. And they use some of the componentry, like the super, the crazy manufactured swing arm. I mean, you say Brembo brakes, it's not just Brembo brakes like you get on a Ducati. It's like world superbike spec Brembo brakes that you practically can't even buy if you wanted them. I mean, they're really, really, really high-end exclusive stuff. So that aspect of it is cool, but it is odd to see it kind of like painted onto a traditional Harley cruiser as we've come to know it, and think they really do seem like they're two things that are at odds with each other. I feel like they just stopped short of
the finish line. And here's the deal. Yeah. But I get it. If I were in
Harley
Davidson's marketing department, and for all the people that are already at their keyboards typing that I just don't understand Harley Davidson, I get it, because there are 131 riders out there with the money to spend that want to show up at a bike night with the ultimate bling. And they do not want a King of the Baggers sport bike. They do not want rear sets. They do not want a 37-inch seat height. They do not want a low slung handlebar. Correct. I understand what they did here. I am not
Spurgeon Dunbar wants.
No, man. Listen, I am not the person that's going to go out and drop down 110K on this bike anyway. So I'm not the person they have to please. It just disappoints me that they could have gone really nuts with this, and I just feel like they stopped shy. Lance is looking like he's ready to just cut my throat. So what do you got, Lance?
I think the key.
He's going to call you an a-hole. He's going to do it.
The key here is the difference between what Indian did and what Harley did. And Indian went with build a race bike, and Harley built a street bike. Right. And Zach knows this better than anybody, because Zach's the only one of the three of us who's actually ridden the King of the Baggers race bike on the track. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to build a track-only bike like Indian did, then you can do all those things you're talking about, Spurgeon. But if you want it to be street legal, let me ask you, Zach, you rode the King of the Baggers race bike. If you took that bike and you could somehow put a license plate on it and ride it on the street, would you want to ride that bike on the street in traffic even a little bit? No. And I'm 6'2" and a good rider. Exactly.
I mean, it's like the actual race bike is, I don't even know if most people could ride it.
The seat height is the same as the 890 Rally that I own in my garage.
It's wider
seat height. Yeah.
Yes.
And it weighs 600 and something pounds.
You almost can't get on and off it without help.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let me do it. They wouldn't let me get on without help. I asked to do it, and they said, "No, you're not allowed to do it."
I'm not saying they should have gone,
Whole
King of the Baggers race bike full stop.
Right.
I'm saying I feel like they probably could have gotten us a little bit closer. And maybe there's a way through aftermarket kits for somebody that buys this, if they do want to put a taller seat on or they want to kind of change the foot pegs up. I mean, they could do it. I don't think anybody's going to. I don't think that's who they're aiming at for this.
Let me ask you guys this for your guess. If you were going to guess of those 131 units, how many will go on display and never ever even hit the street or a track?
122.
Yeah. I'm guessing a lot of Harley Davidson dealerships will probably take one and put it on display in the dealership.
Yeah. It'll never leave the dealership.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I have so much more to talk about on that, but let's move on.
I like the Harley did it.
Say some more stuff, you guys.
No, I just I like that they did it. I want to give them credit. I know that we often get our audience sometimes thinks that we cast a negative light on Harley Davidson. I like what they did here. From a taking chances standpoint. But, from a realistic standpoint, Lance, Harley Davidson has also talked about changes to their lineup. At the time of recording this, we actually pulled Lemmy back into the fold, and we sent Lemmy down to Texas to eat some barbecue and to ride some Harleys for us. He has an article coming out. By the time this podcast goes out, you'll be able to read Lemmy's article about the new Harley Davidson lineup. Lance, is there anything that our audience would be surprised about the new Harley lineup in 2025? Are we getting a Bronx in 2025? What's happening?
Don't even bring it up. No, so we've kind of already covered some of the other news. This particular launch seemed perfectly cut out for Lemmy because there was a lot of barbecue involved, and there were six cruisers, the cruiser lineup. Harley has the touring, sport, and cruiser segments. So they have somewhat consolidated the cruiser segment. They got rid of a couple of models, so now we're down to 6 models. So we're getting the Street Mob, Fat Boy, Heritage, Breakout, Lowrider S, and Lowrider ST are now the 6 models that we're going to have for 2025. And this basically, they all have the Milwaukee A117 engine, but there's 3 different tunes. So the 2 sort of, classic have the basic tune, and then the 2 in the middle, as Lemmy refers to them as the dad bikes, they have the middle tune, and then the Lowrider S and Lowrider ST have the high output tune. But they all have the 117 engine. So there's nothing really there that I would say is going to surprise anybody. It's just it's still a little bit of that consolidation that we're seeing from Harley, where they're far more likely to trim the number of models and kind of narrow their line and focus on their best selling models and not try to make a million different things.
Yep. So fair enough.
The other point you made, Lance, in an article that you wrote around both American and European financials, and I know there's a lot up in the air right now. Again, at the time of recording this, President Trump came out yesterday and talked about tariffs again. It seems like tariffs are going to become more of a talking point as we look at motorcycling throughout the year. One of the things that you talked about in a previous article was around Harley Davidson's continued push to premium, right? I don't think they have a model in their lineup sub $15,000. Is that going to be the trend that we think is going to continue for their bikes?
We may be getting off ahead of the topic here, but I do think it's important to note that while Harley has definitely had a focus on premium, they're definitely focusing on their touring category, which is their biggest sellers. But one thing that they did this year is they cut the price pretty significantly on the Nightster, which is their lowest cost model. So
that's the liquid cooled,
the liquid
975 cc, and sort of like the baby version of the engine that's in the Pan America.
Yeah, in the sport category, they've got the Sportster, the Nightster, and the Nightster S. So and the Nightster is the least expensive model that you could buy if you go into a Harley dealership and you want to buy a new motorcycle these days. So they
brought the price down on that.
They cut the price significantly. Really? From what was it,
it wasn't 11,400.
11,999 last year, 2024. A 2025 is 10,499.
Really?
I didn't realize
I
that
thought
they
it was
had
like 12 or 13 grand for that bike.
Yeah.
But they have cut the price basically $1,500,
Okay.
and which is pretty darn significant.
Mhm,
So
sure.
and then I think I don't know if we want to if it's too soon to sort of segue into this, but
you take it.
where that gets interesting is what we're seeing Indian do is they're expanding their Scout lineup. So while Harley's been going in this direction of focusing on the touring bikes, the big bikes, the CVOs, the expensive stuff, Indian has been expanding its Scout lineup, which is their entry-level lineup. And they actually have 5 different Scout models, which is another story that our hardworking motorcycle tester, Dustin, did in recent months, was riding those new Scouts. So
and that worked out for them financially. So when we look at how 2024 wrapped up, Harley Davidson was struggling a little bit more financially than Indian was, especially, in not only the US markets, but the foreign markets. Indian kind of was break even, with the expansion of their Scout line. Yeah. And then in foreign markets, Indian was actually up between 20 and 30% from a sales standpoint.
Yeah. We're talking percent, so we're not talking huge numbers with Indian. Indian's obviously much smaller than Harley Davidson, but it is interesting that those two American manufacturers are taking a different strategic approach to the market.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I think Harley did really cutting the price on the Nightster is in part a reaction to the fact that there is all this competition in the form of the Scout.
And the Scout line starts at what, $999, like 10 grand?
I think the cheapest one is $12,999. That's the cheapest Scout is $12,999. So you can get a Harley cheaper than you can buy the cheapest Indian Scout.
Oh, really? I thought that there was the lowest, the base Scout was like 10 grand or
that's what I thought
10.5 or something too. But that's why we had you on the on the podcast, Lance. You know your stuff better than we do. So
well, I could be. I've been wrong before.
No. The Scout starts at $99999.
What can you get for $999?
Says is that a Scout 60?
The Scout 60 bobber.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm referring not to the 60s.
You son of a
to the
If I wasn't here fact checking you, who's fact checking you?
Nobody.
Who's
apparently.
policing the police? I'm gonna have to start reviewing all of your articles before you publish them on CommonTread, Lance.
So for those of you not familiar with these boys are talking about here, the Indian Scout lineup consists of a raft of models that Dustin rode, as Lance said, that use the 1200cc liquid cooled V twin. The Scout 60 uses a 1000cc version of a similar engine. So it's just a slightly smaller engine. It's a 5-speed gearbox, I believe, instead of a 6, or maybe it has 6 now, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is it's smaller and a little bit more affordable. And those ones are available for as little as about 10 grand.
Yes, you're right. And that is the appropriate comparison to the Nightster model because they're closer in size. And I was referring, when I was talking about the cheapest one being $12,999, I was referring to the 1200 engine. So you're right. That Spurgeon is totally correct. I stand corrected.
The important thing is we have it on record. I swear to God, if producer Chase accidentally deletes this file, it's going to be
okay. Well, one more thing before we take a quick break here. What we want you to talk about, Lance. You just came back from Daytona Beach, Florida. That's in the United States of America, and you were riding the 50th anniversary Goldwing.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that machine?
And how was the seafood in Daytona Beach?
Same as it always was, I guess. I didn't eat it, so I don't know. But
and did you see more topless men or women?
I averted my gaze from both.
You did. From both. Yeah, that's smart.
Let me tell you, the bike week scene is just as same as it ever was.
Just as sordid as it's always been.
Same as it ever was.
Okay.
But I got to ride the 50th anniversary Goldwing, and it's just impressive that any model has been around for 50 years. But
agreed.
Honda did a pretty good job of kind of also teaching us some stuff about that history that we may not have, the average person may not know. There are some ways that model is even more important to Honda than you might think. For example, it was developed around the time that Mr. Honda himself stepped down from leadership of the company. And so the company was going through this metamorphosis inevitably anyway back in 1975 when the Goldwing came out. And the Goldwing was the first bike that was produced by what Honda calls the Large Leader Project. approach, which is a management approach where there's one guy who's in charge of all the different teams, whether it's engineering, design, all these different teams that have to work together to produce a motorcycle. And that was the very first model that was produced using that team approach, which Honda still uses today for, everything, cars, motorcycles, ATVs, all the stuff it produces. So it's a hugely important model. As far as the actual bike itself, I mean, honestly, except for a couple of 50th anniversary badges and a few refinements to the interface on the digital dash, there's really not much different from last year. But it's a very fine motorcycle. It's a great way to.
Let me ask a question, and I don't want to give away too much of your article, Lance, but for people that haven't read the article, you got to fly down to Barber. You got to ride the bike at the track on Barber. You then got to ride it to Daytona Beach, but you also got to ride a 1975 Goldwing on the track. And the comparisons between the two, I would imagine, are pretty significant. I mean, for those people listening, the original 75 Goldwing was like a big naked bike. It was a big naked bike. It was a flat 4. It wasn't a 6-cylinder. The idea of integrated luggage and fairings did not exist in motorcycling at that point in time. And so when you think about the true disparity between the evolution of 50 years, what was it like for you back to back getting to ride
That's
the
a really
first
cool opportunity.
One and the newest one?
Well, it was a very limited opportunity. I don't want anyone to get wild ideas here. We got 2 laps on on the 75.
So that's like 4.2 miles or something.
It's about 5 miles if you count the time getting into the pit lane and parking area. But we had 2 laps on the 25 and 2 laps on the 75. And but it was really interesting. It was fascinating, and I encourage anyone to go look at the article if only to see the photo of the 2 bikes side by side, because it really drives home what Spurgeon's saying in that you could actually get an optional fairing for that 75. There was one available, but I don't think anybody bought it. And then around that time, Craig Vetter started coming out with windjammer fairings, and everybody bought those instead. And then by the time the 80s came around, Honda said, screw it, we're just going to put fairings on all these. Everybody's using them for touring anyway. But the 75, I'll say 2 things. One of all, whenever I see a bike of that age compared to a modern bike sitting side by side, I always ask, wait a minute, who shrunk the old bike down to 7/8 scale? Because everything's just smaller back then and everything's bigger now. And then the other thing, every single person who got off of the 75 pretty much had the same comment. This bike ride's surprisingly good for a 50-year-old motorcycle, but damn, I wish they'd invented brakes back then.
Yeah, because it had disc brakes, right?
But it had disc brakes, but
disc brakes were pretty new then.
Disc brakes were pretty new.
They've only been around for a little while.
Let's just say I was really glad it also had engine braking, because I think that was a little more effective than the brakes.
Yeah, I had a 76 CB550, and it was a full 4-finger squeeze on that front brake lever to try and slow it down.
Oh yeah,
that's funny.
It was fun.
All right. Well, that was a fun little trip we just took, fellas, through sport touring and cruisers, sport bikes, touring bikes, and the like. Spurge, should we take a quick break before we dive into the rest of it?
Let's hear from Motul, and then we'll come back with some more motorcycle talk. All right, so we are back. And the next category we're going to dive into is ADV and dual sport. There seems to be a lot of changes coming, a lot of new models in this category. And let's start off with you, Zach. I know we normally do guest honors, but I feel like Lance has been kind of leading the charge. Anything that strikes your fancy, given the fact that I know that you've had the opportunity to ride some of the newer 2025 models that are anticipated for this year?
Well, this is another place where we're going to talk a lot about how bikes are getting smaller, or not bikes are getting smaller, but the bikes that seem the most exciting are the ones that are smaller, I guess. I guess the 2 that I will highlight, one is that BMW F450 GS prototype that BMW unveiled, I think, at EICMA last year. Is that right? In November, maybe?
Yep.
And it's not a production model yet, but basically it's a sort of smallish, aggressive looking little parallel twin. And I think lots of people were like, wow, cool, because the BMW G310 GS is kind of has a different mantra. Yeah, can be a little toothless in the face of the type of obstacles that the Spurgeon Dunbars of the world like to take on with their adventure bikes.
But it could be perfect for the Lance Olivers of the world. I know Lance just picked up a used G.
Time will tell.
Lance just got a used 310.
Well, so the one that I'll keep circling back to here, and I just like to start the conversation so that I set the groundwork a little bit, is the CF Moto Ibex 450, known around the world or known in other places in the world as the 450 MT, I believe. But the Ibex 450 is a 450cc ish parallel twin 270 degree crank pin offset. Sort of think of it as a miniature Yamaha Tenere 700 engine or a miniature Africa Twin engine or something like that. Transalp engine, whatever. It's because I got that little thump to it, but it's a smaller size. It is a 21-inch front wheel. It's a $6,500 motorcycle, weighs about 425 pounds. It is as we will go on to discuss here, I think in riding that bike, I kept thinking, I can't believe someone else didn't do this sooner. So that BMW is a cool concept, but unless it really just delivers something that I'm not expecting, it seems like CF Moto beat everyone to the punch with the miniature Yamaha Tenere 700, which is kind of what everyone's been asking for. And it's not the bike that Honda builds. It's not the bike that Kawasaki builds. It's not the bike that Suzuki builds. It's something new and different. And, it's the one that I'm sort of most excited about, I think.
Well, we had our freelancer Joe Jackson write an article about this for CommonTread last year.
We did.
The bike is finally coming to market in actual dealerships in 2025. You, out of Lance and myself, Zach, you got a chance to ride one recently. How does it set itself apart from something like we're seeing? For example, we're seeing the new KTM 390 Adventure R and Enduro R kind of come out. They're differentiating themselves a little bit in the marketplace. They're kind of going after a bit more of an aggressive market. They're also kind of differentiating between, I had a question, for Chris Fillmore at KTM saying, hey, who's the Adventure R for? Who's the Enduro for? And how are they differentiating? For someone like yourself coming off the CF Moto Ibex 450, how is it going to play with some of these established, manufacturers in the segment? Yeah,
that's the thing that I think is so interesting about it. I have not ridden the
new
KTM 390 Adventure R. Or the 390 Enduro, or there's a 390 Adventure X or something, right? Isn't there like another? Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's the one that's like the less aggressive. That's not Spurgeon Dunbar.
Oh, that's not the Spurgeon Dunbar. No. Gotcha. Okay. Well, anyway, KTM is historically known for, you're correct, this sort of more aggressive style of bike and it being sort of, all those things. I don't actually think, I think that's mostly press photos and the posters you see. Is the bike looks like it's doing something crazy. It has knobbies on it. It has a guy who's wearing dirt stuff and he's like doing a berm shot or jumping off a hip on a trail and the thing's airborne and you're like, wow. But anyone who's ridden a 390 Adventure will tell you it's not a super aggressive bike. It is very much entry level. It's a little bit tame. It's not the thing that people, I think, wanted it to be when they first saw drawings of it or prototypes or mocked it up in their head, and so maybe this new one will be a little bit more. So I know our buddy Sagar Sheldakar in India rode the new 390 Adventure, and he seemed to think it was a hoot in the dirt. So this new one might take a new take on things. All this is to say, the thing about the CF Moto Ibex that stood out to me is that it seems a little bit more aggressive and kind of ready for an adventure scrap than I was expecting. The suspension is stiffer than I was expecting. The engine is a little bit more aggressive than I was expecting. And it's at its core, it just seems a little bit more kind of rugged and built for the type of, Spurgeon Dunbaring than I was expecting. In fact, I was talking to Ari the other day and he was like, oh man, people are going to have to fix the suspension on that bike. And he hadn't ridden it yet. His assumption was that it was just super soft and soggy because that's every other bike in this category. The Versys X300, the Honda NX 500, the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 to some extent. And past iterations of the KTM 390 Adventure, the BMW G310 GS. All these bikes are kind of soggy and soft and mellow and tame, and the seat is low so that you can do these things. But when I was riding that CF Moto, I was like jumping over water bars and slamming through creek beds and stuff, and I didn't bottom it out. And I was like, okay, cool. This is kind of the bike that, again, I like
Zach Quartz, the scourge of the Mojave. Look at you out there.
How. And I guess my question is, and maybe we'll put this to finally, guest honors here. Lance, are you still in the conversation? Cool. You're still there.
I'm here, standing by.
How did Kawasaki or Honda or Suzuki or BMW or Triumph or Yamaha or Aprilia or how did it take CF Moto to build this bike? How did no one else build this bike first? And maybe we don't know that. Maybe no one will buy it. Maybe no one likes it. Maybe I'm the only one that likes it. But
yeah, no, I don't know, because it does seem to me that there is that gap in there. I feel like just to pick on Honda, just for an example, they have the CRF 300L, which is a nice soft tame trail bike. And they've got the Transalp, sort of the mid-level adventure category. Right. It does seem like there's room in between for something that would,
Well, and to be fair, they have the NX500, which is
yeah, but I mean something in between that is more of the off-road focus, because the NX has got the 19-inch front and it doesn't have spoked wheels and all that kind of stuff. So I do feel like there is room there. I'm not sure why no one's done it. The other aspect of this that I want to mention is with the Ibex in particular. Obviously, every time at CommonTread we write about the Chinese motorcycles, and the reader discussion goes off the rails in 100 different directions. But one of the very understandable directions people go is, well, what I really want to know is not just how your test ride was on a brand new bike for the first 300 miles of its existence, but how is this thing going to hold up over the long run? Right. And we have now got our hands on one of these, and Dustin Whelan has dedicated himself to beating the crap out of it for the extended period this year. So we hope to actually find out not just how one of these works on the first day when it's brand new, but how it works after we've beaten on it for a few months. So I would invite everybody who's interested in that topic to check back in on CommonTread regularly, because we are going to do more updates on that.
So
I'm interested to see what he learns.
Yeah, for those of you listening that might not be familiar, Dustin Whelan is our main writer over on CommonTread behind Lance. I think Lance still holds the record for most articles published, at least in 2024. But Dustin Whelan is nipping on his heels. When Dustin first started talking about this project with me, I'm going back to Get On Adventure Fest this year. For those of you listening, Get On Adventure Fest is a RevZilla sponsored adventure event out in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And I didn't get to go last year because my wife was having a baby. And so I'm looking forward to getting back out there this year. And I was trying to convince Dustin to go out and bring the CF Moto along. I was kind of offering to, fund his trip if he wanted extra fodder for the article, because I was interested in swapping bikes with him to get some experience on that motorcycle in some of the off-road terrain that I enjoy riding motorcycles.
Yeah,
definitely should.
Yeah. I'm trying. He didn't seem like he wanted to commit to it. We've spoiled him by just flying him to Europe for all these fancy
nice hotels launches in Spain. Who wants to bunk up in Sturgis?
Yeah, I know, nobody. But I will say, so speaking of that, and kind of transitioning this over to the KTM 390 discussion. I had a buddy, Nick, who I actually met at Get On Adventure Fest. Nick is an 890 owner. And as soon as the 390s were released, he was immediately messaging me saying, "What do you think? I think I'm going to trade in my 890 and get one of these bikes." And, my gut reaction was a little bit to the lines of what Zach had kind of thought. I was like, listen, man, I've watched you ride the 890. You're a very capable rider. I think if you drop down to a 390, it just might seem a little bit lethargic to you. And he was like, no, I'm looking at this. I think they hit the nail on the head with this. So that's what I'm most excited to learn about the new 390 platform. They're talking about the fact that they're upgrading the suspension. There's, I believe, premium components available. Are they, is the power going to be updated enough and the components updated enough that really make this something that I feel like people have been asking for. Lance has been talking about, CommonTread readers and the feedback that we're getting in the comment section in that CommonTread community. And I think people have been asking for these small displacement adventure bikes forever. They want something they can ride on the road. They don't want something that's, 400 plus pounds, or 500 plus pounds. They want something that's more usable so they can blow down a dirt road comfortably and not feel intimidated. And when I'm looking at the Ibex 450, when I'm looking at the changes that KTM is making to the 390, when I'm looking at the prototype for the BMW 450, it seems like people are it seems like the manufacturers are listening to that and they're, responding.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it always remains to be seen how the bike actually feels, but the sort of like large scale changes in the market seem pretty clear to read, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that we're not seeing, KTM isn't coming out with like another fire breathing 1000cc, update to the existing platform yet. We haven't really gotten into like what might be coming. BMW had the F900 update last year, which was really great. You had the GS update last year. But it seems to me like the real theme for 2025 is shaping up is more of a focus on updating the smaller displacement part of the segment. And then the other bike that's part of this is the Cove 450, which is another Chinese manufacturer. This is a street legal, kind of a rally replica bike. And it's really aimed at people that want to ride aggressively off-road, but might also want to, leave their house to get to the trail. And I haven't ridden it yet. I don't think anyone here has ridden this one yet, but it's something that's starting to make a stir as they're becoming available in the US.
Yeah. Our buddy Joe Jackson, who went to Asia to ride the CF Moto Ibex 450 for CommonTread, I think just got one of these Cove 450s. So I'm interested to see.
He got rid of a KTM. I think he had a KTM 690
that
he had
690
built out for like
Enduro.
3 years, and he traded that in to get this. And for those of you that don't know, the Cove is it's a 450. It's kind of like a rally styled motorcycle. The 450 is a single cylinder. From a chassis standpoint, it's like 12 inches of suspension travel. Now the suspension's kind of a no name, manufacturer, but it's got an 8-gallon tank, estimated 300-mile range, and it's 319 pounds wet. Now, for those of you that I'm sorry, 319 pounds dry. So I did the math. I added up 8 gallons of gas and weight, threw it on there, and it's going to be about 376 to 380 pounds would be my prediction for an actual wet weight for this motorcycle. Sub 400 pounds it should be coming in at for people looking for something in that small displacement category that's kind of stripped back.
Yeah, and I think important to call out here that that this bike, that the Cove 450 is like quite a different animal than the other 450 class bikes that we've been talking about, like the Ibex 450, the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, the other bikes we mentioned, the Honda NX. It was obviously much more street going, road going, or the Versys X300. Those are all kind of like, those bikes are all between $5,500 and $7,000 or something like that. They have fairly low seat heights. They're not super aggressive. The Cove is supposed to be kind of like upping the ante there. And being that it's being where it's from, as Spurgeon pointed out, the suspension manufacturer might not be a company that you're necessarily familiar with. But the bottom line here is that it's a 450 single. It's more of a dirt bike that's been prepped for sort of rally riding with a big tank. It has a 37-inch seat height. It's a very sort of like serious,
and it's $9,300.
Exactly. It's almost 10 grand. That's where I was going with this, is that it's a different sort of stratum of bike and of price also. But it's worth mentioning because it's again, there are probably people that want this bike that are thinking like, why didn't Honda make this, or you know what I mean? Or why didn't KTM make this bike? Like, it's not a 390 rally. It's not a 690 enduro. It's not some sort of, Enduro EXCF, it's a different animal. And it's cool.
Yeah,
having not ridden it, it's cool.
I look at something like Honda, where they have that 450 engine in the street legal package. I forget what the letter is now. It used to be the 450L.
X.
Now it's
I think it's RX, maybe?
RL or R. Okay, either way,
RX. Something like that, yeah.
You could have taken that package and built that into something that was very similar to this from an aesthetic standpoint. And I think you could have had a competitor for around that same, $10,000 price point, but then you're getting a Honda with the dealership network and things behind it. So it'll be interesting to see how Cove plays out with this. Other bikes that have been criticized, not that I'm criticizing the Cove for a $9,300 price tag, but I think it's going to be a talking point. Suzuki released will be releasing the new DRZ 4S/4S SM. So either the DRZ off-road bike, or they're going to have a supermoto component.
Right.
Price tag on that, I believe, was $8,900. Is that
$89.99?
$9,000.
$9,000.
$89.99.
Which is like,
$9,000.
I mean, you think about, you say like, oh, the Cove is, the Cove 450 is almost a $10,000 bike. Sure. And what is it? It's $9,300. So sure. But also you get a huge gas tank, and you get a little fairing, and you get a pretty proper dirt bike as far as I can tell, just from looking at the specs. And the DRZ 400 historically, and I think probably to some extent this new DRZ 4 that Suzuki's coming out with, is like a sort of a middle of the road dual sport. It's a regular kind of dirt bike feeling thing that you can ride on the street. And it's a good value proposition from an experience standpoint, but to have it be the same price, it does feel kind of crazy, and have it be, a lot more expensive than bikes from KTM and Kawasaki and Honda and CF Moto that kind of ostensibly do what the DRZ does and more, is like a little bit tricky to swallow, right?
The DRZ 400s, for those of you listening that might not be familiar, have always been a popular bike, at least in theory. Since
they first came out in 1913.
They have not changed in recent years. But they were lighter than the 650, but they were never fire breathers, right? Like there's plenty of thumper forums out there that are talking about how you can change the cams and you can do mods and you can get a little more power out of them. And for that, they were a great platform bike, but they were never something that was,
not a lot of jazz hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lance, you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. I was just going to try to put some numbers on this because it was a topic that we delved into at CommonTread because in part, there was a huge amount of anticipation and curiosity about how Suzuki was going to handle this, because they unveiled this redesign back at EICMA.
Right. Well before they unveiled the price. Yeah.
But they didn't tell the price. So we knew what we were getting, but we didn't know how much it was going to cost us. And then we had months of, the website saying TBA under the price. And it just naturally spurred a lot of speculation. And a couple of other things added to that speculation. I mean, one of which is that this bike's been around for 25 years and it really hasn't changed much. So people have been waiting forever for an update. So it finally got fuel injection. It did not get a sixth gear, still has a 5-speed transmission, which some people were disappointed that it didn't get that. So it's nice to have the fuel injection, obviously, but hey, by 2025, you kind of expect that you would. And so people were speculating about the price, and then the price came out after KTM announced that their 390 Enduro R is going to be $5,499. And then Suzuki comes out and says...
Think about that for a second.
Think about it for a second. Suzuki comes out and says, well, our 400 is going to be over $3,000 more than that.
Does the Suzuki have a TFT dash?
Good question. I'll look it up.
I think it has a... I think it is. Isn't it an LCD?
It might be LCD. That sounds more like in line with Suzuki.
In any case, we're talking. When was the last time you had two comparable motorcycles where the Suzuki cost $3,000 more than the KTM?
And don't forget, not even just $3,000 more. It's not $3,000 more. It's like 45% more.
Right. Yes.
Like
it's
40%
huge,
more. It's a lot more.
We're used to paying more for the KTM, not the Suzuki.
And my point in throwing out the TFT dash isn't that the TFT dash is important in its own right, but I think for what the TFT dash represents is like, I think with the KTM, you're probably getting a bit more technology, and maybe that's something you don't want. Right. But you know, when you look at what the smaller KTM is offering as far as, you know, options, you know, I feel like it's still giving you a leg up for less money over the Suzuki.
Yeah. I mean, the Suzuki did add in some electronics that it lacked previously, so that was another addition, and along with the fuel injection. But
yeah, it has ride modes, but like, you flipping ride modes on a
well, that was just it. A lot of people said I didn't ask for ride modes. I asked for a 6 gear. You know,
exactly.
I
mean that's totally fair. I
didn't ask to spend $9,000 either, Suzuki. So you know, you gave me what I didn't want, but you didn't.
I know.
So there was a lot of discussion amongst the readers when we wrote about that specifically. We asked people, "Do you think these bikes are overpriced?" And the overwhelming response was, well, yeah.
Yeah, I think the interesting elephant in the room is going to be, twofold. One, you know, what is going to happen with prices of motorcycles in 2025, given tariffs, and really, is this going to only get worse? Or, you know, the subsequent question is probably more appropriate of like, there's a lot of controversy around KTM right now. Like, as we're recording this podcast, KTM is just kind of getting their feet underneath them from, you know, bankruptcy filings and hearings. And, you know, I feel like I've been kind of watching the story from afar, and it seems like they're coming back pretty aggressively. Like, all right, all that's behind us. Let's start Team Orange Blood. And I'm getting emails about like, do I want to bleed orange and like join their team and all this stuff? And I'm like, you guys are going really hard at this, and I haven't seen any actual, you know, change to, you know, show me how you're gonna, you know, remedy some of the past sins. So I think that's still on a lot of consumers' minds for people that might be cross shopping the two, and they're looking at one that's, you know, sub $6,000 and one that's $9,000. If people don't have confidence that their adventure bike is going to be able to take them on an adventure and bring them home, the price doesn't matter, right? And I think that's probably some of the similar critiques that we've heard around the CF Moto and the Cove from people that are saying, I like the idea of this, but I'm not 100% sold on the reliability of this. And I think that gets back to your point, Lance, about like why we're excited that CF Moto gave Dustin one of these to spend a year riding, so that we can talk to that a bit more authoritatively.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. If you look at the reader comments when we talked about this whole situation of the KTM competitor being cheaper than the Suzuki competitor, you know, people were there. You had really different opinions. Some people were saying, well, geez, even if the KTM has problems for $3,000, I can fix a lot of problems, you know. On the other hand, you had people say, yeah, but the Suzuki, they're probably not going to deny your warranty claim. I mean, there's a lot of people who are just angry at KTM right now and skeptical. And that's just one of the many headwinds that the company's facing.
Well, I feel like that could be, to steal Zach's phrase, entirely another podcast.
Yeah, it is another podcast, not one for today.
I would like to move on from the ADV dual sport category, but
which is a surprising pivot, everybody. I want you to just appreciate for a second how difficult it is for Spurgeon to say, I would like to talk about something other than adventure bikes.
I'm trying to be mindful. It's a new season.
You're
and
unselfish lover.
I'm trying to be mindful of like, the audience did not come to hear me wax poetic about my thoughts about KTM for another 30 minutes on top of what will surely be a 2-hour episode. Let's move to standard motorcycles. And I do want to kind of kick things off here, because the standard motorcycle that I was most excited to kind of see, and I know this is 2024 into 2025. I think it's a 2025 model year. I haven't seen one in the wild yet, so I'm going to count it. But the new R12S, you know, when I'm thinking about a standard motorcycle, you know, and this kind of carries through, excuse me, you know, a lot of the standard motorcycles that we're seeing are still retro inspired. Is retro still a thing in 2025? I don't want to go too far down the road. But the R12S is a bike from BMW. It's kind of a reimagined version of the R9T, and it has a bit more of like a throwback to that classic 70s BMW style aesthetic. Zach, I know I'm preaching a little bit more into your family wheelhouse at this point. What were your thoughts when you saw this come out? And I know that the price tag is steep. We can get into that in a minute, but what were your thoughts?
Well, the R12S is, as far as I understand it, a spin-off of the R12 9T. And we're going to get pretty lost in BMW alphabet soup here, so bear with me. But the R12 9T is the updated version of the R9T, which uses a slightly updated platform, a little bit different chassis, some updates to the engine, to the electronics, to the bike in general. And there is an R12 9T, which will look very similar to the R9T you've come to know over the past 10 years or so. Sort of the kind of retro standard round headlight looking BMW cafe racer sort of kind of thing. And there's also an R12, which is the cruiser version of that to some extent. It's not a very low slung or kind of visually hyperbolic cruiser. It's just sort of like a slightly more relaxed standard bike. And so those two sort of carry the mantle forward for this retro BMW platform, the R12s. The R12S is this like sexy spin-off that they're probably not going to make all that many of, which has the sort of like creamsicle orange and white metal flake of the R90S from 1970 something or whatever, which is a classic iconic paint scheme from BMW. And they've sort of spiced up this new model to have like a little bikini headlight fairing. And
they're playing pretty hard into the R90S legacy, even like the marketing on the website and things like that.
Harder than really the bike is really leaning into it, to be honest. And I think it's worth calling out that while that bike looks cool, I would feel remiss if I did not say that I think BMW has dulled the edge of the R9T over the years. There's been a couple updates over the years, and this most recent R12 update it's a little bit milder. It's a little bit more apologetic machine than it has been in the past.
From a suspension, brake standpoint, chassis,
yeah, all of it. I mean, I think. I'm not sure BMW would ever admit this, but I think that the first R9T in 2014 or whatever it was, that first generation, 2014 through 2017 or 18, I think was the first gen. I think it was just a little bit overbuilt. I think they went a little too hard. I think to do it again, BMW they didn't expect it to sell that well, and they didn't think that people were going to be that excited about it. And BMW did not need to put the premium brakes, the premium suspension, and the really sort of premium touches on that bike that it did in order to get the sales figures that it did. And so the past decade has been them saying, okay, let's just back it off a little bit. We're selling a lot of them. People don't need the really nice suspension. They don't need the really nice brakes. And the first experiment with that was, of course, all those BMW R9T spinoffs, the Scrambler, the Urban GS, the Pure, so on and so forth, the Scrambler. And those were all like dumbed down versions of that original R9T Roadster.
I like that you said the Scrambler twice, because that one I feel like was pretty dumbed down. So you're like,
I said
I'm going to hit that one
Scrambler,
twice.
Right? Yeah. Well, there was an Urban GS and there was a Scrambler, which were like kind of the same thing, but a little different. Anyway, the point is, it's still a cool bike. And I think I'm being a BMW kid, like growing up in an air cooled BMW household, like I get it. I think they're cool. But I do think that kind of first or second gen of the R9T, OG R9T, was really the cream of the crop.
So I want to just say that, when that first gen came out, it wasn't cheap by any means. I think, and we're talking 10 years ago, I think the price tag on that was north of 16 grand. And at the time it was competing against, some Triumph Bonnevilles that were maybe not as hot and heavy as what we see today from Triumph. Triumph has definitely expanded their lineup, and we can talk about that in a minute. But you're now looking at the R12S, which is north of $20,000. If you go to BMW's website,
that's ultra premium. Yeah.
But they show you like the as
that's right. Price. That's right. Isn't this the one that has like a $10,000 delta where it's like starts at X and then it's like as shown $28,000?
Yeah, this one doesn't even show the start at anymore. This one just shows as shown is basically $21,600. Not talking about any of the other fees that you're going to pay to actually put one of these in your garage. And I think that's probably my biggest struggle here is that I'm looking at this and it looks like something that would be fun. It looks like something that'd be eye catching to take out for a Sunday stroll, show up at your ice cream shop and have a conversation about. But it strikes me as something that's probably a little bit more on the premium price point for what the bike actually is. So, and Lance, as somebody that often shops, at the premium price point, I'm interested if he has any thoughts here.
Currently wearing a $400 shirt. I mean, you can't see it, or you can't quite tell, but it's a very, very.
We refer to him as Colonel. So Colonel Oliver, what thoughts do you have here?
I will say that my two disappointments in the massive parking lot of the Daytona International Speedway as I roamed the many manufacturer displays. I already told you the one, which was the lack of a Tiger Sport 800 AC. Right. The other one was the lack of an R12S. They didn't have one. They had this massive.
They didn't even have an R12-9T?
They had the regular R12-9T, but they didn't have that. I wanted to see the orange S version. I just wanted to see it in person, see if it looked as, see if the paint looked as fun in person as it does. But they didn't have one of those. They had all these demo bikes. They had miles of demo bikes. They didn't have one of those.
If you're not sure what we're referring to, it's an orange and silver paint scheme. There is a little bikini fairing on the front. There's a seat cowl in the back. It definitely has more of like a sporty angle to it.
I think you guys are putting too much weight on the R12S. Like factory custom mumbo jumbo. Like really, the story there is the R12.
I don't think so. I think we forget like that stuff sells, man. Like
aesthetic
is important. And I think for me, like it was cool to look at some of the marketing material with like the old R90S imagery and like how they were trying to capture some of that. I just think it's a good looking bike. And I know that we often bypass aesthetics, and as somebody that owns a KTM 890 who has never
bypassed aesthetics.
Yeah, I've never seen my motorcycle or heard anybody refer to my motorcycle as a good looking machine, myself included. There is something about style and aesthetics that still, plucks at the heartstrings. And this is one that I think really, if I'm going to give credit to BMW for anything on this, I think they did a great job with the overall styling. I like it.
Fair enough. Well, I would like to pivot away from BMW, but stay within this category of big 1200cc modern classic roadsters and talk about the Speed Twin 1200 and 1200 RS with Lance Oliver. Went to Europe to ride.
Where were you in this? Where were you in Europe for this one, Lance? This wasn't Spain.
That was in the island of Mallorca.
Mallorca,
Spain. Yeah.
Sí, señor. Yeah. So, I think that the Speed Twin 1200 has always been a really glorious example of a good. It's a bike that I think stands toe to toe with the original BMW R9T in so much as it's just like simple, pure, distilled, excellent motorcycling that's handsome and strong and well built. And I didn't love all the updates that Triumph made to that bike, but you seem to like it, right, Lance?
Yeah, I did like it. I think we're riding around on the island of Mallorca here in the middle of the Mediterranean. The weather's nice, the roads are curvy, et cetera. And somebody made the comment, if you lived here, this would be the perfect bike to have. Because you're on an island, you're not going to go, you don't need something that's capable of 2 long day trip, 2 long days in the saddle. And it was just a really fun motorcycle to ride. I would say
that's the press launch paradox right there. Like that press launches often exist in the space in which the bike would make the most possible sense. And you're like, well, okay. And like brands certainly do that on purpose.
But to go back to your comparison there that you just made, I would look at, say, I remember we had one of the original R9T models, the Urban GS we had in-house for a while. And I rode that. That was only one of the original R9T models I rode. And if I compare that to the Triumph, I prefer the Triumph.
And which one was that? You said that it was the R9T.
We had it was the Urban GS.
Okay.
We also had the Scrambler for a while too. And
I don't think
either one of those.
Yeah, I don't think I know you got to ride the Scrambler. I don't think I ever did. So anyway, I like the Triumph a lot.
So I know that you talk about, it being a great island hopper for Mallorca. I would be remiss if I didn't start off season 10. One of the updates to the t-shirts that we made for Highside Lowside is we did the Highside Lowside drinking game t-shirt, which hopefully is for sale at the time of this recording. And one of the rules of the Highside Lowside drinking game is if I mention taking a cross-country trip on a Bonneville, you have to take a sip of whatever beverage you're enjoying while listening to this podcast, be it your morning coffee or your afternoon cocktail. And so for me, I look at something like this, and it's so much more capable than the old school 865 air-cooled Bonneville that's in my garage, right? Mm-hmm. And this is something where I haven't ridden the newest one, but I have ridden the previous version, and it's just a killer machine. You could throw some saddlebags on this and take a road trip. You can use this as your grocery getter. You can use this to commute to the office. You can use this for a Sunday stroll. Like, it's just an amazing engine. It handles really well. The RS version does bump things up a little bit. You get a more premium suspension with some adjustability. You get the Brembo brakes. So it's a bit more of a sporty angle to it. But compared to the BMW, where we were talking, however you want to slice the S version, north of 20 grand, you can get the top of the line RS for 16. A lot of people, kind of hinted at the fact that, and then Lance, I believe you were one of them, like, you probably don't even need the RS. The base version's pretty good at 13.5 or 13.6. Right. Like, it's just a killer usable motorcycle, putting out around 100 horsepower, torquey, fun, and the average rider would probably hop on this bike and just have a hoot. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt like, we rode the two versions back to back. We basically had an out and back day ride. And then, so in the morning I rode the RS, and in the afternoon I rode the regular model. And I don't think anybody, unless you are probably more performance minded than most riders of that motorcycle are going to be, right, I don't think you're going to be disappointed with the base model. And it still does. To me, it does everything you want that kind of bike to do.
Zach, you hinted at maybe not fully appreciating some of the changes that were made. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of, take a dissenting opinion on?
What was some of the things? Let me see. I didn't like the dash update. It's got a TFT on it now, doesn't it? Isn't it a?
Yeah, there were complaints about that. There were some who complained that it should have the old style round dials still, to go with that. That particular model. So Triumph talked about that a little bit at the press launch. They said, there are people who want a retro bike that they want it to be thoroughly authentic, and those people need to buy a Bonneville. And then we've got the Speed Twin it's retro, but we wanted to have modern touches, and that's the way they differentiate.
But hang on a second. Let me ask a question.
I don't like it.
Let me ask a question. This question is to Zach. So the problem that I have with some of Triumph's non-retro bikes is that they have some of the most frustrating dash layouts that I've experienced in motorcycling, right? Like, I remember riding the Tiger 900 for the first time, and it was just like, it's just confusing. You could make this easier. Like, why is this the way it is? Was that your complaint? Was it that it was hard, it wasn't intuitive, or was it you just didn't like the dash from an aesthetic standpoint?
Are you asking me or Lance?
I'm asking you, Zach, because you said you didn't like the dash.
It's aesthetic for me.
Okay.
It's a single roundel. It deprioritizes the tachometer. It's like, it is a lot more modern looking, that like, it's everything's sort of digital and blocky. And, I just think it's an analog bike, and to have Triumph say like, oh, well, it's got modern touches. I don't buy it. I mean, if that's the direction that Triumph is leaning, and what it wants to prioritize, then like, obviously that's Triumph's prerogative. Triumph is the maker of the motorcycle. And I'm not going to like argue too hard with that. But for me, it is a retro motorcycle, and it benefited a lot from the beautiful chrome bezeled dual gauges that the previous bike had. It had lovely big speedometer and a big tachometer, just like you sort of want and expect from a retro bike. And it had these little integrated LCD screens where you could shut off traction control or change the clock from a clock to trip meter or whatever. Like, it was really basic stuff. So it had a whiff of modern touch to it, but really what you saw when you looked at it was this really classic look. And to me, you go from 2 gauges to 1 gauge, you're saving some money, right? Maybe that's not why they did it. Maybe the design was entirely why they did it, but I don't think it looks as good. And I suspect that if I were to buy one of these bikes for myself, I would look for that generation of 2020 to 2024, 21 to 23 or whatever it was.
Yeah, I will just say that I don't necessarily feel exactly the same way you do. But
your hair is so gray.
But your view is the predominant view amongst everybody who test rode the bike at the press launch. So you're in the majority.
You can take a stronger stance against him, Lance. Just tell him flat out that he's wrong. Like really lean into it.
It's not wrong. I don't.
I'm surprised that you don't care. I'm surprised that you're not like interested in this.
It's not as big a deal to me, but there were a lot of other people who had exactly your point
Lightning
of view.
Oliver rides so fast. He's not looking down at the dash, Zach. He's looking through the next corner. And speaking of looking through the next corner,
we should get moving.
Let's transition into something that surprised me. And this is another one in the standard category, but I didn't know that this existed. And so when I was doing research, I stumbled upon a humble little model called the W230 from Kawasaki.
Spurgeon.
Yes. I missed it. I don't know. Did we write about it on CommonTread? Are you mad at me?
I'm so disappointed.
I'm sorry.
My feelings are hurt. We wrote an article about this bike and you did not read it.
Apparently I missed this one, Lance. I apologize, but let's walk through this for the audience.
What's your job title again?
I don't want to talk about that, Lance. As far as our audience is concerned, I'm a mere podcasting host that in this case missed a piece of information as it came out on CommonTread. I'm certainly not the person in charge of CommonTread. But it's an air-cooled single cylinder 233cc. The real story here for me is that it's definitely entry level focused on this in something that's not sport bike style. Up until this point, really, the only manufacturer we've seen do this was Triumph with like the Speed 400 or the Scrambler 400. Yeah, so to see Kawasaki come out with something that is a bit more of a standard motorcycle, sub 250 cc's, I think it's cool. And I apologize, Lance. You've obviously been putting the news out there. I missed the article, but I did stumble upon this in my research.
For those of you who have been like, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I remember this one now because I remember the photo, the goofy photo. I remember the goofy photo of this. I forgot.
The goofy photo.
Anyway, Zach, sorry, I cut you off.
Those of you longing, pining, throbbing even for a small retro motorcycle that looks like it was built in 1972 and it weighs 300 pounds and makes 14 horsepower.
Yep.
Your prayers have been answered.
All six of you.
I think my biggest critique with this is that like just go buy the Triumph product. I mean, for the same price, the Triumph is going to be just a little bit.
Yeah, I have a hard time finding getting an idea of who's going to buy this because
you know what it is.
The person that lives in a town in the middle of nowhere that only has a Kawasaki dealership and not a Triumph dealership.
They need to live on an island that's smaller than Mallorca. Is what they need.
Smaller. It's too small for Mallorca. It's got to be.
Yeah, it is. It is incredibly cute.
It's very cute. The person who's going to buy this is going to have to be based on style. Someone's going to look at that and say, that is just the coolest thing I've ever seen. It is nicely styled. It looks like, I think it's, very well done, but functionally.
Right. It's like you're going to get kind of like, well, this is an exaggeration. You're going to get a little bit more motorcycle than you get with a Honda Grom. Like it has full size wheels and it has almost twice the horsepower and it costs a little bit more. It is a bigger, it's a full size bike, but it is very small and limited in its performance. And if you you want a 300-pound bike to put on the bumper of your RV and bop around town when you land in, Nowheresville, Colorado or Idaho or Kentucky or whatever, like I think, like it is, if it serves the purpose you want, it looks like a dynamite little bike.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those
real
bikes,
narrow silo.
Yeah, this is going to be one of those bikes that a few people really, really, really want, and everybody else can't justify the price.
Well, I think that speaks to the high point of the BMW R12S and to the low point of not the low point, but the other end of the spectrum,
the
W230 is that like a lot of people are buying bikes on aesthetic. And if you've got the money and you want something that plugs at your heartstrings, whether it's a $21,000, BMW or a $5,700 Kawasaki, you've got something there for you. Let's move on to our final category. We should just throw it out as a call out. I don't think we need to dive into it. FTR is Indian is eliminating the FTR going into 2025.
Right. True enough.
So to wrap up the standard category, it was just a piece of news that we wanted to throw out there. The FTR line of motorcycles is going away from Indian.
How do you guys feel about that? What quickly. Don't care.
I saw a Reddit
Super
thread
sad.
where I think it was a Reddit thread or it was a comment on CommonTread. I can't remember where I read it, but it said this was the bike that everybody loved to love, but not actually buy. Yep. It was the bike that everybody wanted to talk about how much they loved it, but nobody was actually going and putting down cash on it.
Yeah. Yep. That's an interesting.
Which is what would have happened with the Bronx if Harley Davidson had built that. Come
on, Lance. You wouldn't have gone out and shed your hard-earned dollars on a Bronx?
No. Did you guys see the Instagram post by the previous owners that said something like it was basically like a quote from a fictional person that was like, "No way am I buying a Panigale V4 with a double-sided swing arm," says guy who can't even afford payments on his Ninja 400 or something like that.
Exactly.
And I feel like it's like the motorcycling community is full of people like that, right? Who are sort of like, "No, the Ducati sucks because it has this," or like, "Oh my God, that Indian is so cool." And no one's going to do anything about it. It doesn't like, so anyway, okay. So on to everyone's favorite category, electric motorcycles and electric and alternative. Yeah. Anything that we haven't really covered up to this point. There's obviously plenty of machines that we haven't talked about. We've done our best to
I would also warn that we're nearing in the 2-hour mark for this podcast. So this is one that, I think we saved this one for last because we're not going to dive in too aggressively in the electronic and alternative category.
There are a couple of interesting things that have happened. A couple of things that I want to call out in the electric space. Livewire came out with another version of the S2 platform, which I forget what it's called, but it's basically
the Alpinista.
Thank you. And it looks very similar to the Del Mar or the Mulholland because it's the same platform. It's just a little bit different. It's funny to me that they're kind of making such a big deal about having different models on the same sort of powertrain, and then they don't really seem different enough to me to warrant the press release. But anyway, that is a thing that's happening, and Livewire is chugging along. The Stark Varg motocross bike, electric motocross bike that Spurgeon and I talked about a couple seasons ago at some length. There is a street legal dual sport that is either out now or coming soon.
It's supposed to be delivery starting in May, according to Stark.
Okay. So that's kind of an exciting thing. And that's obviously a big leap to take. It seems simple, right? You have an electric motocross bike. Cool. Just put some headlights on it and then you have a street bike, which, I think theoretically it is that simple, but for a company to produce bikes that they sell as plated legal machines is a different ball of wax. And I think deserve a tip of the cap to Stark. And I hope that there's, I hope that there's some traction there. No pun intended. I think that's the street legal electric dual sport is a fun idea and hasn't caught on in a way that has provided a realistic business model up to this point. But I think that there is a customer base there and I'm kind of excited about it.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out and how that works functionally, right? Like when I think of the street legal dual sport, this is still a crowd that might be, throwing their bike in the back of the pickup truck. So you're not burning electricity, getting it to the riding site. And then you might have a campsite with like a camper plug-in where you go out and, ride for 70 miles, come back, plug the bike in, have a campfire, have a hot dog, and then go out and ride the next day. So I think there could be some potential functionality here, that plays into it. And it'll be exciting because some of the reviews, and I haven't ridden a Stark Varg, but like some of the feedback have been like, pretty impressed with the way that bike performs on the trails. I have some friends that ride locally here in Pennsylvania that, the one guy got one and had a lot of favorable, comments on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sort of like, I'm interested in that. I think it's kind of cool.
Can we talk about, I don't think we've ever addressed this formally, and it probably bears mention, that about a year and a half, 2 years ago, one of the bikes that we were talking about in this category was the Sondors, the Metacycle. And as of this year, if not the end of last year, I believe Sondor was officially out of business.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's always, talking about new bikes in the electric category, we're not going to cover every single one. There are a lot of bikes that have come out or are coming out that it's like hard to keep up with all the sort of electric motorcycle startups sometimes, it seems like. And Dustin's covered a bunch of them. And I'm struggling to remember the names. So can you remind me, Lance, some of the names of the ones what's the one that he rode, the English company?
The Maving.
Yeah, the Maving, which is kind of a cool bike there. Dustin did a test of that bike. You can find it on CommonTread. And then he also rode that Rivet Anthem, I think. Mm-hmm. He also wrote a story about that and that you can read. And we've also been in touch with a company called Verge, which has an electric bike, which has a hubless rear wheel, or a ostensibly hubless rear wheel. And it's kind of a cool looking motorcycle, and the specs are pretty good on it. We haven't ridden it yet. It's hard to keep up with all of the new companies coming out with new stuff. We try to cover them sort of as best we can on CommonTread, but there are a lot of ideas, and well, I don't know, how do I put this? Seems like there are more ideas and more series funding in the electric motorcycle space than there are customers sometimes.
Yeah, and they come and go quickly, and we've seen plenty of startups promise a lot and fail to deliver. But for that reason, I guess the two things that I'm really interested in this space are from more established manufacturers, and one is the Flying Flea brand that we've seen from Royal Enfield. So they're at AITA, they showed one of their models, and they're supposed to have two models coming out, not this year, but next year. But just because we're talking with a very well-established brand, I think that's, to me, more interesting, because we're not dealing with some startup that's only around next week if they get another round of funding, that kind of thing.
I think for
Enfield is associated with a pretty strong financial arm, for sure.
Yeah,
I was going to say, if you're listening in North America and you're thinking, I don't see a lot of Royal Enfields on the road, I think you have to keep in mind that from a global sales standpoint, Royal Enfield is a really big player.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing that I think is really interesting, and this goes back to, a pet peeve of mine for years in the electric space, is that I feel like so much investment money, time, and focus has been wasted on building hyper bikes and super bikes and these upper level massive things that'll go 200 miles an hour, but you can only ride them for 10 minutes and you need to recharge. I'm really interested in what's happening in the lower end. And Zero has promised that they're going to come out with 6 new models in the next 2 years. And they're specifically coming out with the XE and the XB as their first two, which are going to be going at that segment of like the Talaria and the Sauron, those off-road, lightweight electric motorcycles, which I think make a lot of sense. You can ride them in places where you don't have to worry about noise being a problem. They're lightweight off-road bikes. I would love to see Zero maybe be able to sort of solidify their standing in the industry by being able to increase production and move into that segment, which I think the other manufacturers have done a good job in doing with.
Agreed.
So I think those are interesting too. That's what I'm interested in seeing.
Yeah, those are good call outs. And it's worth mentioning, I think, that the Flying Flea that Royal Enfield is showing everyone, and I think is selling soon, though maybe not in the US at this point, is a pretty cool little bike in a vacuum. Good. It's a handsome, it's got interesting lines. The styling is very interesting. The front end is interesting. It's got sort of a weird kind of like Hasek or like weird kind of girder fork situation that's a little bit strange. I don't know. Those are good call outs. And I think also we actually have a Zero S, a sort of like standard naked standard motorcycle from Zero in the garage right now that I'll be doing a daily rider on sometime in probably a month or two. And it just bears mentioning that Zero exists and is building motorcycles, and they've been chugging along for many, many years now. And there are satisfied customers out there, and they keep on making bikes, and that's pretty cool in a space where as we said, there's a lot of coming and going.
So speaking of satisfied customers, the one thing we wanted to hit here from an alternative standpoint is Honda did release a new version of their small little 125 platform in the DAX 125. This is a bike that Zach got to ride for Daily Rider. But you know, the satisfied customer aspect is one of my friends, Tim, and I'll see if he's okay with me sharing his photo, sent me a photo last weekend of him with his brand new DAX 125 in the garage. And he also sent me a picture of him in his youth with an original Honda, what would it have been? Well, it wasn't a 125. What was the?
It's a CT70 or
CT70 or CT90?
Yeah. There were a couple of them, but yeah.
But it was him, and he goes, well, the new DAX is a little bit bigger than the one I had as a kid, but frankly, I'm a little bit bigger too. And he's definitely, kind of grown into a bigger version. But, you know, Tim is a person that has multiple motorcycles in the garage. He's not one that is only looking for a small displacement bike, but I think it really kind of plucked at his heartstrings, of his youth. And I think when you look at something like the Honda DAX, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people that are going to, probably appreciate it from an aesthetic standpoint. And there's probably also some new riders out there that, maybe they have no tie back to the CT90, but, they're excited about, getting something a little bit unique and a little bit left of center. And, it's kind of cool.
It's a lovable little machine, like all those Honda Minimotos are, and it's just another brick in the wall. It's a cool little bike. All right. Well, I don't know if that was all of the new motorcycles in 2025, but those are at least some of the ones that we were excited about, and hopefully you learned a thing or two on this little run through.
And we know that if we missed anything, we can count on you, the Highside, Lowside audience, to drop a comment, shoot over an email, let us know, what we missed and what your take is on some of the motorcycles that we talked about today. And Zach, do we want to hit predictions, or we want to move right in the engine sound guessing game? I
think we're done here. Yeah. Let's move it on. Let's guess an engine sound, and we will no doubt talk about other new motorcycles at some point in the rest of season 10.
All right. So we talked about how we're giving away more t-shirts in season 10. And in order to do that, we had to figure out, some extra sponsorships. So we actually are welcoming on our friends Akrapovich. They are going to be the sponsors for the Engine Sound Guessing Game. The Engine Sound Guessing Game has kind of taken off over the last few seasons. We enjoy playing it. We enjoy playing it with our guests, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from you, the audience, that enjoy playing at home. If you're not familiar, Akrapovich makes premium exhausts, some of the best that money can buy for your motorcycle. I will only say that my disappointment lies in the fact that I have had two Akrapovich exhausts at this point, one on my 1090 and one on my 890. And I just wish this sponsorship would have happened before I had to, shell out my hard-earned money. I could have tried to leverage an exhaust for my motorcycle. But
indeed. Well, let's jump right into it. If you haven't played before, we are going to listen to a motorcycle start up, rev a few times, and then shut down. And we are going to do our darndest to try to figure out what the heck it is. Are you ready, Spurgeon Dunbar and Lance Oliver, to play the first engine sound guessing game of season 10?
Ready as I'm going to be.
All right,
Lance did stump us in season 9. So for those of you that aren't familiar with season 9, Lance actually submitted an engine sound for Zach and I to guess. We didn't realize that at the time, and he fooled us both. So you're good on the other side of this game, Lance.
Right. Yeah, now the shoe's on the other foot here, Silver Fox. We'll see how you do. Okay, everybody, let's take a listen and see what we think. Woo.
I just want to throw out a note to our audience. So for those of you that are familiar with the game, in seasons past, one of the things that we've been able to rely on is producer Chase always kind of took a soft spot for our guest and would try to pick an engine sound that would either harken back to their youth or maybe a motorcycle that they have in their garage currently. And producer Chase kind of pulled us aside and said, "I'm not doing it this season, guys. I'm gonna just pull out all the stops and make these as random as possible because I'm tired of you using, my wily ways as a clue." So if you're playing at home and you've tried to get inside producer Chase's brain like we have in the past, it's not going to help you this season, supposedly.
Supposedly. Okay. Guest honors. What are you hearing, Lance? What do you got? Thumpity thumpity thump.
Why do I have to go first?
Because you're the guest, baby.
Yeah, guest honors. I don't know how many cylinders do you think you hear? What else? Any other things tickling your brain?
2.
I like the guess for 2.
Sounds like 2 to me. Sounds like it doesn't sound.
Doesn't sound like a single? Doesn't sound like a single to anybody?
No, I thought it was an air-cooled twin, but
okay. I like that. I like that. My first guess is Moto Guzzi something or other. Sounds like modern enough. I hear a fuel pump before it starts up that makes me think it's fuel injected, but it's got that lopey, thumpy kind of vintage.
For those of you listening, Moto Guzzi's a V twin.
That's right. 90-degree V twin, transversely mounted.
So the cylinders are coming out at your knees.
Right. So that's my like shoot from the hip guess. I've only listened to it once.
It sounds air cooled. It's like, it doesn't sound new or sophisticated. It sounds rudimentary, air cooled.
Sort of like lopey and vintage a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what I'm getting to, but let's get a hint.
It didn't sound potato Harley Davidson though.
No. Although liquid cooled Harleys have kind of a strange sound that I struggle to place sometimes.
Didn't sound like that to me.
Let's get a hint, shall we?
Okay. The first hint from producer Chase. Not really going to help us at all. A 2-cylinder engine. This is a 2-cylinder engine that we're listening to. So if nothing else, we're on the right track.
We are on the right track.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's play it one more time for the audience at home so that they get to hear the sound again.
Yeah.
I'm changed. I heard some things that time that I didn't pay attention to the first time. There was definitely a fuel pump whine in the beginning.
For sure.
So maybe a little bit more modern than I would have originally have thought.
It's got that 90-degree V twin thump. So Honda Rebel 1100, big lopey 270-degree crank, or like Africa Twin 1100 or something like that.
I don't hate that idea.
No, you don't think so, Lance?
I don't know.
You don't like it? The Moto Guzzi is the sexy choice here. It's like the one that I want it to be because I want it to be like, oh, you can tell you can hear the passion.
Passione.
But I think it could easily be.
Meanwhile, we've offended every Italian listener that is tuning in.
Both of them. Okay, what's the second hint?
Second hint from producer Chase. The listener who provided this sound commented, quote, "These bikes are heavily underrated because of their low horsepower figure, 75 horsepower. So these bikes are heavily underrated because they only make 75 horsepower." Could it be the Rebel?
It could be a Rebel 1100.
1100?
I mean, Rebel 1100 is a pretty underrated bike, in my opinion.
I don't know. I think that
75 horsepower.
But
I don't think it's the Guzzi at that point.
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
That's exactly the kind of thing a Guzzi owner would say.
Exactly,
they're underrated because.
Which Guzzi?
What's a Stone? What's a V7 Stone?
No, those are those
would be a
45
V9
horsepower.
or it would be a bigger bike.
Like the 9.
Yeah,
I can't imagine like the 9 isn't making 75 horsepower.
Well, then how much does like a Stelvio make? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Any Moto Guzzi, frankly.
Yeah, but then
you don't think it. You think it's air cooled? You guys, you still think it's air cooled?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I just
bottom line is that we don't know.
I just don't know if the Moto Guzzi. I can understand your argument that that's exactly something a Moto Guzzi. Nobody appreciates my motorcycle.
It's a Moto Guzzi 1100 Breva.
Okay. I like your.
I'm totally wrong on that. I say that with 100% certainty, and equally with 100% certainty that I'm wrong. But that's what I'm going to say.
I feel like I recognize the fuel pump, and it sounds like a Triumph to me. I'm all over the map.
No.
What do we got, Spurge? We don't know. Well, the bottom line is we don't know what
But I like that Lance put a spade in the ground though. Like he
did. He deserves a lot of credit for that.
I'm not embarrassed to be wrong. I'm not embarrassed to be wrong.
All right. I am embarrassed that none of us guessed this manufacturer at all, or we didn't take the 75 horsepower clue, or the fact that it's underappreciated into account and only thought about Moto Guzzi, because the answer is actually a Ducati. It is a 2023 Ducati Scrambler Desert Sled. We were in the right ballpark from a continent geographic area.
We were. Interesting.
Bruno sent us in the clip. So thank you to Bruno. Bruno, you are going to get a Highside, Lowside t-shirt. What'd you say?
Definitely going to be offended by our Italian accents for sure. Sorry, Bruno.
Bruno says this is a stock motorcycle. Listening to Rev Trivia every other week has become a new tradition for me and my dad. Now that we live across the country from one another, Bruno, I'll tell you what, we will not only send you a Highside Lowside t-shirt, but we'll also send your dad a Highside Lowside t-shirt, because you guys are playing together from across the continent. Shoot us an email with your preferred t-shirt size, mailing address, as well as t-shirt style. Now that we have a couple different ones to choose from.
Yeah, and make sure you both wear them at the next family reunion.
There you go. You can raise some questions at Thanksgiving dinner.
I feel like I should have stuck with the whole 90-degree V-twin air-cooled thing. I should have stuck with it, but instead I waffled. I lost confidence. Anyway, I'm still proud of us. I think we put a couple. That's a solid 3 out of 5 stars performance. I think we weren't way off base.
There you go. And Bruno, if you really want to thank anybody for that t-shirt, you can thank Akrapovich. So I don't know what kind of motorcycle you ride, but see if they have an exhaust for your bike. Buy a $1,000 exhaust, get a free t-shirt.
Lance, you've been a real superstar as always, bringing your encyclopedic knowledge of motorcycles of every era, but especially new ones in 2025. We so appreciate you having on or taking the time to be on the show. And is there anything else you want to tell the viewer and listener before you depart?
Read CommonTread, or just find out more about all of these bikes that we've been talking about.
You could have learned about a Kawasaki 230cc modern marvel before anybody else if you had only read CommonTread, Spurgeon. Damn it.
That's right. I love the throw to CommonTread.
That's my
no ads, free content, 5 articles a week.
Standard advice.
Check it out, everybody.
Yep.
Okay.
Over at RevZilla.com/CommonTread. Lance, thank you so much, but we have more t-shirts to give away, so we will see you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, it's always a joy having Lance on the podcast, but boy, can that man talk. We're like 2 hours into this thing and he just would not shut up. So that being said, we're gonna make sure we get through the remainder of the episode. Obviously, we're just kidding, Lance. We love you. So we talked about, t-shirts a lot today, but we've gotten comments on Spotify saying, hey, I'm leaving comments on Spotify now. Spotify's expanded their capabilities. I want a t-shirt too. Right. So we are going to take that into consideration for this season of the podcast. The other thing to note, talking about Spotify, is that, Zach, we've launched Daily Rider as a Spotify platform podcast too. For people that want to watch you in action on YouTube, you can still do that.
Sure.
But now that people just want the information, maybe while they're riding their motorcycle into work, they can listen to the sweet sound of your sultry voice.
Right. It did seem like Daily Rider was a thing that people were, watching on YouTube for certain aspects of the bikes I review visually, but in large part, it's sort of a podcast format. I'm just talking you through what is good and what's not good about each and every bike. So you can listen and watch on Spotify now.
I think that's a good point for those of you that aren't familiar. Spotify does have video integration.
Yes.
Part of why we've been expanding on that platform is because they're expanding with their video capabilities. So you can actually watch Zach on Spotify.
Indeed. That being said, I believe this episode's t-shirt winner did come from the Apple Podcast.
Old habits die hard.
Old habits die hard. Of course, you can still win a t-shirt by commenting on the show on the Apple Podcast platform, which is what Turtle327 did. That's right, Turtle327. If you're listening, you are our t-shirt winner. Turtle says, "I love motorcycles!" Exclamation point. "My wife will ride on my motorcycle with me, but has no interest in riding her own. She will, however, listen to Highside, Lowside with me. We both enjoy the friendly banter. She loves to repeat something she heard on the show every now and then at wildly inappropriate times, like asking how my, quote, chicken lips are doing after listening to the motorcycle terminology episode. Even though she doesn't ride herself, it's really great to be able to share a little bit of motorcycling culture with her. And thank you, Highside, Lowside." I love it. And I don't think I'm going to call them chicken strips anymore. I think I'm going to start calling them chicken lips. So you can tell your wife that. She invented a new term. I think that's delightful. If you think your wife would like a Highside, Lowside t-shirt, let us know. We'll send one to her too. Turtle327, send us your mailing address and your preferred t-shirt size and or sizes, and we'll get them in the mail.
If you haven't been able to tell, we are getting very liberal already. I mean, we're kicking off season 10 with a liberal dosage of t-shirts.
And we got new ones in the works. You know, we gotta make it rain.
Yeah, so continue to leave those reviews over on Apple Podcasts. That is where that call out comes from. As we get into the Highside, Lowside comment, this is where you're leaving a comment on Spotify, you're leaving a comment on YouTube, or you're shooting us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
Which, by the way, is where you should send your t-shirt size and mailing address, Turtle, in case I didn't mention that.
highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. Let us know what you need and we'll take care of you. The email, this particular comment comes in via email from Andy and says, "How many fingers do you use on the clutch lever? In off-road riding, it is standard to run your clutch with just 2 fingers. Put your index and your middle finger on the lever while your pinky and your ring finger are tight on the grip. In my humble opinion, this is the best method because it gives the rider greater control over your handlebars while you can control the power at the rear wheel at the same time. I recently started riding on the street, and I'm noticing all these crazy people riding motorcycles around with all 4 fingers in the clutch. Come to find out, that's how they teach it in the MSF course. Am I the only one that thinks this is a flawed technique, or am I the crazy one?" From Andy.
This is interesting. I mean, I like that Andy's thinking about this. I don't know, Spurge. I mean, is there a right and wrong way to do that? Like, is there a?
It's hard for me because
I think it depends on the bike. Honestly, like I ride a lot of different bikes. You know, I ride dozens and dozens of bikes every year, and I think it depends on the bike. Like it depends on the way the clutch lever kind of interacts with the handlebar and where the engagement zone is. And
if it's a Harley Davidson with a clutch pull that is like, you know, reeling in a 12-pound bass, yeah, I don't think there's a right or wrong way. And like I use both. There's times where I'm riding on the street and I'm lazy and I'm just, you know, bear pawing all 4 fingers on the clutch because, you know, it's been a long day. I typically, for my brake and my clutch lever, it's, you know, 1 or 2 fingers is how I'm normally doing it. I will defend the MSF a little bit here because we've gotten some feedback. Ari recently just did a shop manual episode on this topic around covering the front brake. Similar idea in this. And I think, you know, one of the points is that the MSF is trying to cover a lot of information in a very little time. The MSF is an introduction class. It's how I learned how to ride a motorcycle. I think they do a great job, but they're also catering to a lot of different abilities in a very short amount of time to give people the basics they know to feel comfortable to go out and ride a motorcycle. And part of what they're trying to do is they're trying to give people, you know, that information from a beginner standpoint. And I think it bears mention that you shouldn't go out and take an MSF course and then just stop learning. Like that's the key takeaway here.
Or stop trying things. Yeah. I guess that's the same difference. Yeah.
They're going to give you the basics of what you need to know. You then are going to go out and get off of a parking lot and get onto the street and actually start to figure some of this stuff out for yourself. Read some books. We've talked about, I know one of my favorites that I've talked about is Total Control from Lee Parks. Right. There's a lot of education that goes on beyond just the beginner. And it sounds like, you know, in your experience, Andy, you know, you might be coming at this, even though you're coming at it from a dirt angle and you've never ridden on the street before. It sounds like you might have more experience than potentially the average beginner street rider based on your background.
True enough. One little thing that I will call out is years ago, years ago now. I'm winding the clock back. I rode dirt bikes with a fella in Australia named Jeff Ballard. He's a successful off-road rider and a champion of some kind, of many kinds, I believe, in Australia and around the world at some point or another. He told me that when I was riding dirt bikes with him, that he on the throttle hand would hold the throttle with his index finger and his thumb. Sort of like if you imagine doing like an OK sign where you're holding three fingers out and you're touching your index finger and your thumb together, he would hold the throttle with those two digits and then he would reach forward with the other three fingers to grab the front brake on his dirt bike. A little bit of strange technique, but dude won a lot of races. Very, very good rider. You can't tell him he's doing it wrong, but he certainly did it differently than I did it. So, you know, to a certain extent, it's what works for you.
So I think the other thing here too is from a theory standpoint of like, you know, why is one maybe better or more preferred than the other? If you're thinking about this simply with the clutch that Andy's talking about, and for those of you listening, I'll try and do my best to describe. If you've got two fingers wrapped around the handlebar and then two fingers using the clutch, let's say you accidentally pop that clutch out too aggressively, or you come on that throttle a bit too hard. If you've got all four fingers off and that bike takes off on you, it's a lot harder for you to grab the handlebar and really hold on to the bike.
Sure.
Whereas if you've got two fingers kind of anchoring on and you're controlling the clutch with the other two fingers, especially as you get into more advanced riding techniques where clutch finesse comes into play a lot more and you're trying to get away from like the on-off feel of transitioning through the gears, it is a practice that I think people kind of gravitate towards as they become more advanced in their riding.
Okay. Well, everybody, we've given away a raft of t-shirts. We talked to Lance about new bikes.
Andy gets a t-shirt too this time.
Andy gets, okay, sure. Yeah. Andy we know you have our email.
Yeah. I said lowside.com.
We do appreciate everyone sticking around, listening to what we had to say with Lance, playing the engine sound guessing game with us, telling Raymond whether or not he was the a-hole. It's been quite a journey here to kick off season 10. Spurjo, what's your big takeaway from this episode here, huh?
I am curious if I can retroactively get reimbursed for some Akrapovich exhaust parts.
You're really coming back around.
That's what's spinning around in my head at the moment. No, I think I like this episode because, as you saw, there's a few models that sometimes pass me by, and as soon as I went through and I saw the one photo of the little kid riding the 230 Kawasaki, I was like, oh, I remember that, but I didn't remember it. And so for me, this is actually a great refresher episode going into a new season of riding and kind of taking a look at like what does the current landscape look like? Not just of new models, which we primarily focused on today, but you know, through the research, it also kind of allowed me to gravitate towards, oh yeah, I forgot about that bike and that's still around, or oh, it sounds like the FTR went away. So I think for me, it's a great way to start the season, and hopefully the audience feels so as well, or feels similarly. How about yourself?
Well, yeah. What's my big takeaway here? Lance just never fails to surprise me. He's always got an opinion or a bike that I forgot about or something or another.
What did you forget about?
Good question. He brought now I don't remember. Was it electric? Oh yeah, the flying flea. That's what I was going to say. The flying flea. What a great call out that was. Very interesting project. Very encouraging movement in that section of the market, and it was not on my radar, even though I read the stories about it when the veils were pulled off it last year. So I'm glad Lance brought that up. He's always got a little joke up his sleeve, you know.
He's one of my favorite people in the world. I talked to him he's the only person that, aside from my wife, who could top my speed dial on my cell phone. I feel like I've said that before, but it wasn't until I met Nicole that Lance was finally usurped as the first number in my speed dial, because I talked to him that often. Because it's just fun to talk bikes with Lance, and hopefully you, the audience, got a glimpse of that today.
Yes,
I will say, we are trying some new stuff out for season 10. we listen to your feedback. We try to incorporate that as much as possible, dear listener, while still kind of holding true to what the program has become. If you do have any feedback for us, if you like the new format, don't like the new format, don't send it to Zach and I personally. Send it to producer Chase at Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com.
Chase K at RevZilla.com.
We would love to hear your feedback, but I think that does it. This was a heck of a doozy of an episode to kick things off with for season 10. Thank you all for being with us for this ride so far, and we look forward to another full season with you.
See you next time, everybody.